Oh, we still got some people coming in. Go ahead, sign in, and we'll get started in just a moment. Well, welcome. I'm Mark Miles. I'm San Joaquin County Council, and this is the San Joaquin County Public Workshop for the Cannabis Policy Project. So the way that we do this is that I'm going to provide some introduction, kind of where we are, why we're having these workshops, and then in a few minutes I'll turn it over to Zoe Merrill. Zoe is the Deputy County Counsel in my office, and she is really the brains behind this policy project and organizing the outreach and gathering all of the information from the public so that we can bring it back to the Board of Supervisors. The workshop agenda, we're going to look at the overview of the state laws and the current county ordinances, an overview of commercial cannabis business types. Zoe will be responsible for that. The discussion topics that we're looking at are as follows: commercial cultivation, retail and dispensary, manufacturing, testing, distribution, and transportation, and then finally, when we get to personal cannabis cultivation, I'll take it back over and then we'll wrap it up. Usually I hand well, let me introduce you to the team that we've got here. So, in addition to Zoe Merrill from my office, we also have the county's information systems team back in the back, Greg Moore and Beth Warren, and I did not get your name before we started. Brendan, okay, and so we are live streaming this on Facebook because we're trying to do maximum outreach. So I know everybody couldn't pack in the room, although we have a great turnout tonight. This is the fourth meeting, and I think we finally got it down. Last meeting went really well for the streaming on Facebook as well. So we're streaming it on Facebook. The IS team is also responsible for the mics and the setup, and we really appreciate that. In addition, we've got some people around the room with microphones, and then we have Mr. Jeffrey Graham up here, and he's going to take notes of the comments that you provide us. And the reason that we're doing that is because we want to capture as much information as we can for the Board of Supervisors. So we're capturing it both on video, we're capturing it in written comment, and then we'll gather all that together and we'll put it in a report that we give to the Board of Supervisors. Over on this side of the room, we've got Bob, and he's got a microphone. So if you have a comment when it comes to that point, or you have questions, please use the microphone because we want to make sure that we catch it all. And over on this side of the room, we have Rosa, and she's got a microphone as well. As I said, we are recording this and broadcasting it live. So we've been doing these public workshops. These are the ones we've had so far. We started out in Tracy on April 17th. Then we went to the District 1 at the Public Health Auditorium down on Hazleton. Then followed that last week with Manteca and Ripon. Finally, May 1st, we're here in Supervisorial District 2. And tomorrow we'll be in Lodi at the Lodi Library. Next week, then, we'll be at the Elks Lodge up on Thornton Road, if I remember to get that contract signed and turned in. And then lastly, once we get through with the public outreach, we've set up 3 meetings for those who are either in the industry or want to be in the industries, where we can have really specific conversations about how, if the Board of Supervisors says yes to allow these commercial businesses in the county, what kind of regulation is appropriate, what kind of regulation allows you to operate in the best manner, but also respects your neighbors and also the desires of the county. So we want to have those, and we've broken those down to, on May 16th, we're going to talk with those who want to operate dispensaries or retail. On the 22nd, cultivation, and on June 5th, testing, transportation, distribution, and manufacturing. Those will all be out at the Ag Center, out on Earhart Avenue, out by the airport. All right, so most of you know that in 2015, Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act was passed, and what that generally did was it set up the licensing structure and regulatory structure for medical cannabis. That was then amended later to be the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. One of the things, or some of the things that allowed, was it allowed for a dual licensing structure, both a local license. It also allowed for certain distances that you had to be from schools in order to operate a business. But clearly it allowed counties and local agencies, cities, to regulate what occurred within their jurisdiction. So in 2016, Prop 64 was passed, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. Followed a very similar licensing scheme where you have licensing that's required both at the local level and at the state level before you can operate any of the commercial cannabis businesses. Prop 64 passed in San Joaquin County via a very thin margin, 51 to 49, but it did pass, and it passed statewide, and that's kind of what we're here to talk about. So under state law, there is no public consumption. There is no smoking or vaping where tobacco is prohibited. No use, possession, or entry into licensed establishments by anyone under 21. No smoking within 1,000 feet of schools except within a private residence if the odor is not detectable on the school grounds. No possession on school or daycare properties. No driving while intoxicated. No smoking in a vehicle. No unsecured outdoor cultivation, and no secured inventory. What it did provide, though, was that every adult over age of 21 can grow up to 6 plants. You can possess an ounce, 28 grams, I think that is, and you can possess the product of those 6 plants. Back in about 2008, yes, sir. The product of the 6 plants? Yes, that's my understanding, is that's in addition to the ounce. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. In 2008, San Joaquin County adopted a ban or moratorium on dispensaries in the unincorporated county. And let me pause right there for a moment and talk about this. What we're talking about tonight is not how are commercial businesses going to operate in the city of Stockton, or how are they going to operate in Lodi, or how are they going to operate in Tracy, or any of the incorporated cities within the county. The only thing we're talking about tonight is how commercial businesses, commercial cannabis operation is going to operate in the unincorporated county. So outside the boundaries of Stockton, outside the boundaries of any of the municipalities, how will these businesses operate? So, as I said, in 2008, the board adopted a prohibition against dispensaries. It wasn't that they were taking a hard line and they were saying we're against dispensaries. What they did was they said, we know that some cities are going to allow dispensaries and others are not. And in order to respect those that are saying no, we're not going to allow somebody to set up on their boundaries and then impose externalities of these businesses on them. So we'll say no in the unincorporated county and let the cities do what they want to do. So it was a good government type, good neighbor type policy that they were adopting. In 2015, the board adopted a cultivation ban, which prohibits all indoor and outdoor medical marijuana cultivation in the unincorporated county. On February 28th of this year, Ms. Merrill brought a report to the Board of Supervisors laying out this groundwork. What has happened since 2015 and the adoption of MRSA and the adoption of the Adult Use Act, and how does that then roll out within San Joaquin County? So she presented this information to the board, and we came away with two directives. First, the Board of Supervisors told us to modify the two existing ordinances, and we're to modify them in two ways. First, we are to modify them to make it clear that all of the license types that are included in the Adult Use Act and the Medical Marijuana Act are reflected and prohibited under the existing ordinances, and to set a sunset date of December 31st of 2017. So we'll have those prohibitions in place, but they will all sunset at the end of this year, which then put the pressure on us to follow up with number two. So number two was determine appropriate regulations. Go out to the public, hold these sessions, talk to the industry experts, gather as much information as you can get about what the impacts are, what the impacts may be, what are the financial ramifications of doing nothing, what are the financial ramifications of doing something, if we're going to tax this, how are we going to tax this? In other words, gather all of this information and bring it back to us for our consideration. So that's what we're in the midst of doing here. My goal is that we're going to complete all of the public outreach and all of the gathering of the information by July 4th. And then we're going to take all of that information and consolidate it into a report that we will take to the Board of Supervisors. My target date is August 8th. The reason I say August 8th is that if the board says, okay, we want you to go put together ordinances, it's going to take us some time to do that in order to get it done by the end of the year and have it effective by the end of the year. So August 8th, then we will follow whatever directive the board gives us, and if it's produced new ordinances that regulate any of these types of businesses, then we'll be preparing that. I anticipate that there will be public outreach that goes along with that as well as environmental review that will have to go along with those ordinances. So the things that we're looking at, the questions that we're asking of you tonight are these. What types of cannabis businesses should be allowed to operate in San Joaquin County, if any at all? So I said earlier, there's about 17 different business types, depending on size and a variety of factors, but there's about 17 different license types. So the question is, what types of businesses should be allowed in the county? What's the best location for each type of cannabis business? And we're not talking specifically about on this corner or that corner, but we're looking at zoning areas in the agricultural area, in the commercial zones, in the industrial zones. How and when should cannabis businesses be allowed to operate? Reasonable business regulations. We're allowed that underneath the state statutes. So what kind of regulations do we need to impose so that, because we all recognize that there is a black market that's out there for the cannabis. So we want to keep it out of the black market. So how do we regulate those businesses appropriately? And lastly, should the county impose reasonable regulations on the personal cultivation of cannabis? So those are the four questions that we're going to ask repeatedly as we go through this presentation. We talk about each of the license types. I said earlier, we're talking about the unincorporated county. So those are the cities within the county, and we're talking about everything outside of that. Reasonably regulate. When we talk about reasonably regulate, the board can adopt ordinances that affect the health, welfare, and safety of the public. And so what we're looking at with those regulations is those limiting the impacts of the businesses on health, safety, and welfare of the public. Limiting where businesses operate, the time that they operate, time, place, and manner. The board cannot ban, but can reasonably regulate the cultivation of the 6 plants. We can't ban the growth of 6 plants indoors, but we can regulate that, and we can say, well, you can grow them outdoors or not. So a lot of that depends on the feedback that we get from the public through this process, and then how the supervisors weigh that and the decisions that they make. Some examples of state standards include distances from schools and daycare, health and safety, testing, environmental protection, workers' protection, and security. Those are things that likely the board will not weigh in on. Some of those things like testing and environmental protection, those are really going to be driven by the state and through their licensing structures. The regulations the first set of regulations just came out either late Thursday or early Friday of last week. And so we'll be looking at those and incorporating that information in the presentation that we bring back to the board. Some land use approaches that we can think about, or that you can think about as we're going through this discussion, is that difference between should cannabis businesses be banned in all zones? Should they be banned in agricultural zones? Well, what about cultivation? Is it appropriate in an ag zone or in a commercial zone? What if it's indoor? So those types of things. The county can allow or restrict in certain overlay districts, so part of an ag zone, the county could allow it in, or part of a commercial zone, or they can allow and restrict businesses in specific zones or require conditional use permits. These are the four major types of zones in the county: agricultural, residential, commercial, and industrial. We're really not talking about the residential zones, except to the extent that you're allowed to grow 6 plants. And so in that instance, we're thinking about, okay, what are the impacts on your neighbors in those residential zones? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Merrill, and she'll take you through the commercial cannabis types.
Thank you. Now that we've started the presentation, is there anyone on this side that wants to move into the middle, or is everybody able to see? If you want to move around, feel free to move around, because we need you. We want you to be able to see everything. We want you to be able to, follow along and all of that. And I know you're itching to make comments, so we're going to go through a few more slides, and then we're going to open it up here. I also want to make a note. I see some people taking notes, which I love. The nerd in me is like, yay! But I also want you to know that this presentation, the PowerPoint, as well as the video of this evening and of each of the workshops before, are on the website. And so that website also will have, as the regulations come down, we've started to put some up, we'll continue to populate that website. If you have something that you want to suggest for that website, I don't mean to just talk to this side of the room. David's over here kind of on his own, so I'm going to try and include you too. Is that you can comment through the website, you can send us an email through the website and say, you know what, I think this would be helpful. So we would love to see that kind of interaction. We are constantly trying to make that an interactive platform, as well as tonight. So let's get into the commercial cannabis businesses. I will tell you that we have now become quite expert in this area, and we love it. And I mean, just talking about it is really interesting. Our board has done something that I think is really groundbreaking. And so I think you're participating in something that may be even bigger than you realize. And that's what our board has done, and specifically with District 2, Supervisor Miller. They have said, we have a blank slate. We currently have a ban, but we really want to hear from the citizens. And they didn't opt to do an ad hoc committee. They didn't opt to do a very small group. They didn't say to council's office, go and draft, X, Y, and Z. What they said was, we want to hear from the stakeholders. That means if the stakeholders are saying no, we want to know why. And if the stakeholders are saying yes to dispensaries, we want to know why, we want to know where, we want to know how do we keep that safe, we want to know, is there a way to benefit other citizens besides those just participating in that business with those dollars, those tax dollars, and that same question for each of the different business types. I think that's important that people participating in the policy project understand. Our job as council is, we are not advocating for or against. So we will, if you say you're pro, I'm going to ask you why. If you say you're against, I'm going to ask you why. And that's because our job is to bring that information to the board. And so I think that's really interesting. And I think our board is doing something, again, that other jurisdictions are not. So congratulations on participating in that. All right, so we are talking about the overview of commercial cannabis businesses. Most of you in this room are familiar with what has been in existence for quite a long time, which are dispensaries run in the collective cooperative or now sort of the nonprofit model. The state laws, like Mark discussed, are bringing us into a whole new world. We are now not talking about collective cooperative dispensaries, and instead we are looking at an entire new marketplace. So when we say businesses, we're not, again, just talking about the old dispensaries. Instead, what we're talking about is here on the left, the medical license types created under MCRSA and the adult license types created under ALMA. So we're going to refer to these as kind of the medical license types or in the adult use market. And boy, this is pretty complicated, right? We went from having collective cooperative dispensaries to now having what we have broken up into 3 license types. But I will tell you from a regulatory standpoint, this is a pretty complicated structure. So what we've done is separated them out. The top, it's kind of in yellow or green, it's kind of hard to tell. But types 1 through 4 on the medical side and 1 through 5 on the adult side, those are the cultivation license types. So you can see it gets pretty complicated. There's specialty, small, medium, nursery. What we are going to focus on these as one license type, as cultivation license types, and we're going to focus on indoor, outdoor, and mixed light. So we all want to be on the same page as to what we're referring to. We are referring to the businesses that are licensed in the dual licensing structure, meaning they're going to have, if we're allowed in San Joaquin County, but in any jurisdiction now, they are required to have a local approval and then a state license, in this case cultivation. The next group we'll talk about are types 10A and 10. Those are the dispensaries and retailers. That's what's really going to ultimately replace the collective cooperative dispensaries. Those are the stores. It's where we can go and buy it. It's the Target of cannabis. And then we've got the sort of pink types. These are what we will refer to as the logistic license types: manufacture, testing, distribution, and transport. So that's how we've broken it up. And the reason that I want to go through this, and I think it's important so that we're on the same page. When we're asking a question, you're talking the same language we are. That's going to make sure that when Jeffrey's taking notes, when we're going through and reporting this to the board, we're all using the same terms. All right, so this is just to reiterate that last slide. Medical has 17 license types. Adult use has 19. Remember, they are similar but not identical. And that's not particularly important for tonight's discussion, but ultimately as we get down into the regulations and decisions, those may be important. So we do want to make sure you're aware of that. Here are the major sections of cannabis businesses and ultimately will be licenses: cultivation, manufacturing, testing, distribution, retail, and transport. All right. This is a slide of how the product will move through a marketplace. If all of the license types are allowed in any given market, or even through and across different jurisdictions or markets, what this doesn't show is that the cultivator, actually, there's a nursery license type within that cultivation. So it's going to start there being grown. It will then go to manufacturing if it's being processed by something into something other than a raw plant. The distributor will be there in the middle. The little green blobs are transporter trucks. We've got the testing. Those are extensive regulations that have come down from the state, which Mark alluded to, that will have to go to a testing facility, back to the distributor, and then ultimately it can only go from the distributor to the end user, either the adult use, recreational user, or that medical patient that will come from the distributor by the green blob transporter. So again, we want to be aware of how that product is moving through both our jurisdiction, if they're all allowed, or ultimately through the cannabis marketplace. And you can see that the product can only stay within this structure and ultimately get to the end user, which is really very different than the previous collective cooperative. You could sort of buy it and sell it in various ways. So what we're talking about first is cultivation. This topic could go on for weeks. We could literally sit in this room and talk about cultivation for weeks. It is extremely complicated as to what input we could take and how to regulate it, what happens, where it should happen, what are the impacts. So this is our first topic. And like I said, there are both, I think, 5 license types under medical and 4 under adult, but we're going to break it down in a different way. We're going to break it down in a way to ask about community concerns. We're going to look at indoor cultivation, outdoor cultivation, or mixed light cultivation. And mixed light cultivation is just in a greenhouse or in a hoop structure, so in a traditional ag setting, but actually protected with some kind of greenhouse structure or hoop. So again, each of those license types that you saw in the previous slide have indoor, outdoor, or mixed light options, and we think that's a really meaningful way to have that discussion. So that's how we're going to do that. Mark alluded to, the state law has some specific regulations limiting location of cannabis businesses. The state already says, remember, the state says cannabis is now legal within this structure, within this market. One of the things that the state says is cannabis businesses cannot be within 600 feet of a school. There's also a buffer of 1,000 feet for some different purposes. In District 2, which is your district, these are the school sites. And in the darker yellow is the 600-foot buffer or boundary, and in the lighter yellow is the 1,000-foot buffer or boundary. This is important to know because some people, wonder if we're asking the question, should we put a cannabis business next to your child's kindergarten? That's not the question we're asking. And in fact, the state has already said that's not appropriate and they're not allowed. So we just want you to have a visual of what that looks like in District 2. So if you think that cultivation is something, because it's been identified as an ag product, which it has been, state law has identified cannabis as an agricultural product. You think of agricultural products and you expect to see them in the ag zones. So that may be one of some input we'll get tonight. If you're talking about agricultural zoning, parcels that are ag, the green represents the ag zones in District 2. Again, this will be up on the website, and each different district has specific maps for their district. So if you're thinking about something in Tracy, you may want to go to the PowerPoint from the Tracy workshop and go ahead and look at those maps. I think they're valuable depending on where you are and what you're looking at. But this is specifically District 2. Now, alternatively, you're thinking of cannabis and you think something in the ag zone would either create security concerns, or alternatively, you value the existing ag products that we have. Obviously, ag is a huge part of San Joaquin County's economy, and you think putting cannabis in that market would displace grapes or displace almonds, things that are, huge stakeholders, huge parts of our economy. And so you don't think that cultivation should be allowed in the ag. You think maybe it should belong only in the commercial zones. It should be indoor and allowed in the commercial zones. Well, these are the commercial zones for District 2. They are much smaller, but you can see them, and I don't know if you can see, but there's little teeny dots here, kind of small shopping centers, and you're really able to see this if you upload it onto your own computers or screens. Now, alternatively, cultivation of cannabis is not generally something we think of as a strip mall type location, and instead you might think of indoor cultivation in a large-scale warehouse. Warehouses are generally, under our existing code, going to be allowed only in industrial. These are the industrial areas, the parcels with industrial zoning in District 2. So this is probably not the most thrilling part of our presentation, but it's really important because remember, we are asking the threshold question of should we allow this at all? If we are going to allow it, one of the most important next questions is where. And so we want to think about these community considerations, but you also want to think of those in the concept of where, ag, commercial, or industrial. So whenever we're thinking about putting something into our community or asking the question if something belongs in our community, in our neighborhoods, we want to think about these considerations. If we allow it in the industrial zone or in the commercial zone or in the ag zone, is odor going to be an issue that negatively impacts surrounding properties? So if I have it on a parcel, is that parcel that has the old farmhouse next door going to be negatively impacted by the odor of the cannabis? Alternatively, and this is a big topic, is security. Depending on where, if we allow it, where we allow it, are we creating security concerns? Remember, our reasonable regulations have to and do, good governance takes into account health and safety considerations. So certainly security is an issue. What about water use? Are we allowing something into our community that's using our water in an appropriate way, a reasonable way? What do we think about that? Energy use. We often don't think about that when we think of ag products, but in this case, because we are considering indoor cultivation, we want to be aware of that question. We're going to ask you these questions before each of the different license types because they are that important to the conversation. Building code and safety issues. Any business that's allowed in San Joaquin County or in any jurisdiction has to abide by existing laws. They're going to have to abide by the building code. So last time when you added that bathroom onto your house and you had to get the permits and the guy had to come out to your house, these guys have to do that too. But there is a question of should we have some extra or should we consider these differently for cannabis businesses? So we put that question out there to you. Costs. What are some of the costs that will be created by this? Enforcement, law enforcement costs, and how maybe can we recoup those? Available locations. That goes to that ag, commercial, and industrial question, right? Or some subset thereof. Buffer zones. Should we not allow cannabis at the very edge of a property because we know that land use compatibility questions and the old neighbor fights happen at the edge? They don't happen generally from something in the center of a parcel. County fees. Yes. No, sorry. We get excited about those. That's really a question of what's reasonable. What helps the county deal with the costs created by the cannabis business, but also allow a business, if we are allowing a business, what is a viable business model? How can we help that business to thrive, but also collect enough revenue to meet the needs to protect the health and safety of the people impacted by that business? And that is a delicate and difficult balance because remember, we are in a whole new world now. All right, and the next one is enforcement. We won't spend as much time on this slide every time, but I think it's really important that you understand regulation is only as good as the enforcement, right? We set it out as a good regulation because we think it creates the balance that we want. But if we can't enforce it, we're not actually creating that balance. We still just kind of have an open market. So those are some questions. All right, community considerations. And now just a review of those. If we allow it, yes or no? If we allow it, where? All right, any questions on cultivation? And then we're going to open it up for a discussion where we're going to get into the real question of whether and then where and how. But do you have any questions about the dual license structure, the state definitions of cultivation, or my thrilling community consideration slide?
Just curious, I didn't see the license 1C on your slide. Was that, I think it was an afterthought. I'm not sure if it's...
Let's see.
It's the micro grower.
Oh, micro business is part of the adult use license scheme. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's for up to parcels of 1 acre.
So, well, there's two things. This gets into that, and we're not going to get too far into this, David, but certainly we can do a follow-up. Turns out that I went to high school with David, so we are alumni together. All right, cannabis, bringing people together. So what David is asking about, I think, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it goes to the question of we have a medical scheme and an adult use scheme. They are similar, but not identical. Under the adult use model, there's a micro business type that is sort of a pipe to, it's like a farm to fork, but it's sort of the cannabis version, and it allows for multiple license types together. And alternatively, in the type 5, there's a large cultivation which will go into effect, I believe, in 2023. So those are kind of some nuances with the license structure, and I think we're attempting to go a little bit broader, but those do exist in the state structure and will have to be addressed if we end up adopting any policy. Is that fair? All right. Any other questions on cultivation? Sir, wait for the mic. And we make you wait for the mic because we really want to capture your comment or question. So what's your question?
My question is micro business. And the state level said they don't have to get a license from the county. Is that true?
That is not true. My understanding is there does still have to be local approval. I believe that the difference, however, is that you don't have to necessarily, and it's not super clear, get local approval for each of the different license types. So, for instance, we theoretically, if our local system mirrored the state system, we would give approval for a type 1, type 2, type 3 cultivator, a manufacturer, a distribution. Now, a micro business actually allows that adult use holder, the adult use license holder for a micro business license type. They would not necessarily have to get because they're allowed to cultivate, do some manufacture, and do some retail, they wouldn't have to have 3 local approvals. From the local level, they would have to just have the one state license and a sufficient approval from the locals. We don't know exactly what that looks like, but that's a nuance. You do have to have local approval. It is still a dual approval. Okay, and certainly if you have more specific questions on that, we can do a follow-up conversation and we can find specifically the language in that code. Any other questions on cultivation? You guys are excited about discussion. All right, let's get to it. All right, we got to get through these slides here. See, this stuff is fun, huh? It's really interesting. And we don't have the right, we don't have an answer. It's just about the discussion. So this is how we are kind of framing the discussion. We are not limiting the discussion, but this is how we're framing it. Because remember, Mark and I have the very enviable job, I know you want it, about packaging all this together and taking it to the Board of Supervisors. And so what we want to do is kind of guide the discussion at least a little bit so that we have the same, at least some discussion points at each workshop. So threshold question: should the county permit commercial cannabis cultivation at all? Yes or no? Should we? Some people are going to say no. Some people are going to say yes. Some people are going to be really subtle about it. Okay. The next question is, if yes, so if we do allow it, should the county permit outdoor cultivation in the unincorporated county? Or indoor cultivation in the unincorporated county? Or mix light greenhouse cultivation? Or should we permit all three? That's really, we want to have those questions answered ultimately. And then should we permit nurseries, which don't actually have the public coming onto those sites, different than your traditional Home Depot garden. But those are kind of the questions we want about cultivation. And then, so we have, if we allow it at all, then what type should we allow? And then should we treat any cannabis cultivation business for medical differently than we treat for adult use? Are we going to look at those two markets differently? Do you think we should look at those cultivators differently? And then where, if anywhere, should commercial cannabis cultivation be permitted in and around your community? So those are kind of the questions we want to frame the discussion with. And so now we're going to open it up. Remember, we've got Rosa has a mic, Bob has a mic, and I also have a mic, though I don't have to give mine up. Sometimes I do. So let's open it up. I heard some yays, and I heard... Okay, let's get you on the mic.
My name's Greg, and there was a year-long study for Steve Moore, before they made the ban. And who was on this fact-finding group of people, to make these ridiculous things that they made? Probably all law enforcement people. Only one side of the issue was discussed. On the indoor, this is what I find, and my views are shared by quite a few people. You have the fire danger. Quite a few fires, you read about it constantly. A lot of fires from wiring set up wrong.
Oh, okay.
Outdoor, none. Property damage. A lot of property damage. Outdoor, none. Steel PG&E, indoor. Happens a lot. They put the smart meters, limited a lot of it, but they still go around it, and they're still old meters. They still do it. Right. None outdoor. Black mold, health hazard. For the rest of the people in the building, if you live with other people in the building, or for your children if people come to your house while you're destroying the house you're in. Home invasion. 3 people just got shot in Sacramento a few days ago. 2 dead. We found 1 in the alley. Home invasion. Indoor grow. None. None on outdoor grow. Okay, so, you heard dollars and cents. You guys have a dollars on the cents. Common sense. Okay?
Okay. I'm going to use that. And pretend
now, another thing about that that they imposed, what happens until December 31st? You're actually telling me the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Department is going to go out and arrest or cite people, take their medical marijuana from them from now to December 31st? Let's just squash it today or now, all right? Because let's move on. Let's get the cutting edge. Let's be progressive about this. We can make San Joaquin County like a jewel. Let's let the rest of the state come to us and say, you're the model. How'd you do it? So I'm proud. So look at those people in San Joaquin County. They've been collecting taxes, the rest of the state up here in Calaveras, Oakland, 10 years, millions and millions of dollars. We're so far behind, it's actually embarrassing to me that the County Board of Supervisors, our government, is this lame. Okay, now, you want to go on? Indoor. We got the biggest #1 problem with indoor growing is rentals. We don't respect any of the homeowners around our own property that rent. Some people rent homes from LA up here. They don't come up a couple years. Their rent doesn't get paid for a couple months. They come home. After the rental, what happened? The people are gone. The house is destroyed. There's holes in the wall, black mold, $50,000 remodel. So what I propose, this is a bullet point. You gotta
slow
either
down
own the home.
Slow down, because I want to make sure. Because you're covering a lot of ground, which is great.
We're just on the indoor and outdoor. We got a lot more.
He's like, I haven't even gotten started. Okay, fair enough. But I do, if you can slow down for me, because I'm trying to take it in too, because I want to make sure we're able to have that discussion.
Sure.
I want Jeffrey to get it down, and I ultimately want to make sure we can go back to this video and capture what you're saying, because I think these are
It'll all
important.
be on the video. I just so used to being limited to 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and you don't really get your point across. I think
These guys might jump in at some point.
I consider myself an
but
expert in the field.
I think that's great. So, Greg, go ahead. You were saying you were at a bullet point.
The problems is these people are coming up to the rentals, especially up north. They've had a lot of it up there. This homes just destroyed. So what I propose, or what you could propose to the board, is that you must own or be buying the property, or have a note from the owner that says it's okay. Very simple, common sense. If you don't have that, you can't grow there. I mean, it's easy. And then all the electrical has to be inspected. You get a discount for having video cameras on your. Well, this is. What it's going to pay for all this is what I'm proposing is a patch tax.
A patch tax.
That's my nickname for it.
Okay.
Okay, and I don't know what the amount could be. I have an arbitrary number in my mind of $500. Okay. What that would do, I predict probably at least 10,000 people would apply for that in an unincorporated area. That's $5 million generated. So with that money that you generate, you could put up inspectors to go inspect the indoor electrical wiring. On the outdoor, I propose that you have a cage, just like an attractive nuisance, right? A swimming pool. Kids drown in them all the time. You're not filling them in. You're not outlawing them. You put a fence around it. You have a lifeguard. It's attractive nuisance. You do things to prevent it. So in an outdoor grow, you would have, I would propose 3 different sizes, a 10 by 20, a 20 by 40, and a 30 by 80. And each one of those.
So that would mitigate, that would allow it to exist in the outdoor, would it be outdoor
it would be
anywhere?
a 6-foot high chain link fence with maybe some Constantine wire around it to certain dimensions or things. You made a lock on the gate. If you had a video camera on it, you'd get a discount on your patch tax, maybe to $400.
Okay.
So then that money would pay for your inspectors. And then I find it absurd that when the sheriff's department goes to, like, say they find an illegal grow with some maybe illegal aliens growing it. You see about them all the time. They got 2,000 plants, no license, no nothing. So, and let's say that the product, the medicine is really good, or whatever you want to call it, and it's really good. Why would they burn that? They go down and they get Lamborghinis, Ferraris, boats from people, and they sell it. They take that money for the sheriff's department, the county
Greg,
funds.
what we want to talk about is moving forward. So not necessarily the existing illicit market, but moving forward. So your thought is, if we allowed it outdoor, we could mitigate the security concerns. Remember, we were talking about these concerns, and so you're saying to mitigate security concerns, you have them pay for maybe a license or a patch tax, and a fence may be one way of keeping people from stealing it or
it's a real good
from
way,
crime.
a chain link fence. It's a deterrent. Plus, what that does too, because the last thing I'm going to do is pepper my neighbor's kid with rubber bullets. Plus, I also in my plan I have a training thing for non-lethal protection of your property, because I don't want some kid to come in there, my neighbor's kid 16 years old, or anybody's grow and get killed over marijuana.
Okay, so you're saying yes, we should allow it, and we can mitigate some security issues,
right,
and that we maybe need to address ways that a homeowner or a business owner, because what we're really talking about now are commercial businesses. So your thought is we do need to address maybe ways businesses can defend their product.
I don't care about the business. They're going to make all kind of money, and that's where you need to tap into that money with your taxes. They can pay for the security. I'm not worried about those guys.
Okay.
I'm worried about
your
me
thought
and
is
my
some
sick brother.
taxes
That's what I'm worried about.
Okay, so you're looking more at a medical market than maybe the adult use market.
I'm medical.
Okay, so you're first. So on the threshold question, I think we can all tell Greg is a yes, we should allow cannabis businesses in the unincorporated county.
Yes.
Okay.
As far as the
So-
businesses, I thought you were talking about cultivation.
We're talking about cultivation
for
by businesses. And the way that the state scheme works, and I think this is a really hard thing to translate from the existing market, is that is now not something that a collective or cooperative can do. One has to be a licensee, meaning they have to be a business, unless You're talking about your 6 plants for your personal use, And Mark's going to talk about that at the end, and I think that's a really important question, and you've raised some of the individuals' cultivation of those 6 plants inside their house. And Greg, we want to make sure we're capturing your comments, not just for the businesses.
What are we talking about
but the
now?
personal.
Businesses growing?
We're talking about commercial cannabis businesses, and those businesses specifically of the type that want to
Just talking about
cultivate.
cultivation in general.
Okay, and your comments are relevant to both businesses and individuals. And I think what we got was we need to look at some security issues, and we need to look at maybe an outdoor model because there's less issues, at least some of the ones that you raised, than the indoor. And I want to make sure we have some room for other people to comment. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up, and then as we circle back around, we'll definitely address some of those. So Greg, again, look at how many comments we got from you, and I really appreciate those. And I think I want to make sure that we're focusing here too, that Greg, you're really, or at least from what I'm getting from your comments, maybe valuing that medical product a little differently than that adult use product. So you really want to see us address that medical.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
I'm old. I've got a lot of aches and
I hear ya.
Parkinson's.
None of us are getting any younger. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned with.
Okay.
I'm also concerned with the county and what we do here.
And I
fees
appreciate
for
that.
the county.
And
you
so
know,
did we make a note that really
fix some of the potholes.
making San Joaquin County progressive, and so we did get that note. So let's have some other comments. Go ahead, Lonnie.
Lonnie Shifrost, I'm with the program called First Five.
Oh, click the bottom. Sorry, we usually click that on before we get. I was diplomatically not saying Bob.
Thanks. Lonnie
Thanks,
Shifrost
Lonnie.
with First Five San Joaquin County Agency. So I am here as a county employee and not asking for any yay, nay considerations. What I am asking about is, would it be possible to have restrictions, guidelines, et cetera, on if this was to move forward? So somewhat similar to cigarette packages that talk about, may complicate pregnancy, whether it's signs up or something they fill out saying, is anyone that may use this pregnant? And if the answer is yes, they get a brochure on information.
Lonnie raises a really important and great question, and of course it's framed in a great way. So the state, when they drafted the medical scheme and the adult use scheme, in both of those they do recognize, similar to with cigarettes, that there is a risk of birth defects. There are some risks to youth. Certainly some things are a little bit different than cigarettes. Something like a brownie, like who doesn't want a brownie? I do. Well, so do kids, unfortunately. And so the state law that exists as drafted, so like Mark was saying, the state law has set a minimum set of regulations, which we cannot say, you know what, just put a big bow on it. In fact, we have to follow those state regulations. Come on in. Don't be shy. Come on in. There's plenty of seats. So yes, under state law, there are certain labeling, there are certain packaging, there are certain ingredient requirements that are outlined in state law. Those would absolutely have to be complied with by local operators. Now, could the county go above and beyond those regulations and require further labeling within our market? Yes, I think we can. And I think to take your comment a little bit further, or sort of where you were going with that was, are there educational things that we can require? And yes, part of what Mark and I have been doing besides these workshops are meeting with a lot of county stakeholders, so including our department heads, people like our director of public health. And is there a way to ensure education? And yes, I think that there absolutely is. So essentially, when we're talking about this, we've got a lot of people who may be pro-business. So what we're saying is, Lonnie is saying, if they say yes, can we say to a business, yes, you can operate here, but either those funds will go into a fund that goes to education for cannabis related impacts on children, or can it go into a fund that says, hey, sometimes kids get neglected in homes where people are abusing this? Can the education fund go to that, or to go to that fund? Alternatively, can we require, if you have a dispensary, maybe that's a specific license type, that you have education materials up? So yes, we are considering it. Yes, we need more information about what community stakeholders would like to see. So the more specific kind of input we can get on that. And certainly if there are business representatives, I would love to hear comments from the business representatives saying, this is how I've seen it someplace else, or you know what, yes, I would be willing to do that, or no, this is why I don't think that's a good idea. So anybody have follow-up comments on Lonnie's comment or in general about cultivation businesses? Go ahead, Zach.
Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Zach.
I believe the county should move forward and allow commercial cultivation, outdoor, mixed light, indoor, as well as nursery operations. I think as far as the appropriate zoning for these businesses, for outdoor and mixed light, obviously the agricultural zones are best suited for that.
Okay.
A way to address some of the potential negative impact as far as the odors and security. I think setbacks from adjacent property lines and like, thoroughfares, adjacent roads and things like that would be a way to address security issues as well as the odor issue.
Okay.
For indoor cultivation, if you have carbon filters set up in your grow along with air cooling and filtration, outside of the cultivation room itself, you would never be able to know that there was cannabis growing inside those doors. I was surprised to see there on the slide that this district actually has a substantial volume of agricultural land.
District 2 has it all.
It
has the most sort of equal options. It's sort of interesting.
And as it relates to indoor cultivation, there's also a substantial amount of industrial zone property. Cannabis is currently the biggest cash crop in California. It's valued right now between $2.7 and $4 billion. The industry is anticipated to grow to between $9 and $15 billion within the next 5 to 10 years. We are an ag county. I think our lack of participation in this statewide market would be a detriment to us. To address some of the concerns that the gentleman here had with respect to black market operators and trying to, drive them out of our local markets. I think the best way to do that is to heavily regulate commercial operators. That'll result in a drop in price and quality going up. That's going to, in and of itself, marginalize black market operators by virtue of a lack of incentive for them to continue to participate in the market. In addition to that, when you have licensees on the record with local public agency, public safety agencies, with a clear set of objective standards to be able to distinguish the good actors from the bad. I think all of those factors within the context of reasonably regulating this market will serve to address those public health and safety issues, driving out the black market and making sure that it's a safe quality product and that these are professionally run safe operations that are going to bring an economic benefit to the community and really help to raise this community up.
So a lot of people have said if we allow them, allow meaning cannabis businesses, and specifically we're talking about cultivation businesses, that by allowing them, what we do is we bring more. It sort of flourishes, and by allowing the businesses, we have all of this cannabis, and pretty soon we'll have cannabis everywhere, and everyone, and then we get reefer madness. And we've had people at these, I know I saw that, it's pretty crazy. And so we've had people at these really raising legitimate, valid concerns that what they have experienced is the black market, and that if we allow it, if we legitimize it, that we would be overrun with crime and all of these things. And instead, what you're saying, and I think this is interesting, and I want people to weigh in, is that actually the legitimate operators would drive that out. So instead of going to the corner to buy from, to buy a dime bag, I don't even know what one buys, but instead of going to the corner and buying in the black market, instead I could go into a business and participate then in this legal market. Does anyone think that allowing cannabis cultivation business will bring crime up or will bring crime down? What are some thoughts on that? Zach, we know your thoughts. And then we'll get to Mondo. So we'll do David and then Mondo.
So I think it would bring crime down. I think people are afraid because the only thing they've seen is crime with the black market. But coming from Trinity County, where it's prolifically grown everywhere, right? It's the state's, or one of the state's biggest counties and least populated county, and people are kind of free to do what they want. There's 3 sheriffs in the whole county and no police. And what happens is these farms are run by families, from grandparents to grandchildren. They all come out this time of year and they clear the land and move the soil and get everything done, and they work together with other families, and it's kind of I don't know, wholesome and sweet, but but the thing is, but allowing people to cultivate, I don't think would necessarily increase any sort of crime, because by nature, I don't think cannabis cultivators are criminals.
Do you think it drives out the black market by allowing those families to do that in a legitimate way? They can call the police if they need help, or do you think it drives out the black market?
Right.
That's sort of an unanswered question, I think, and certainly the board is going to ask that question. Are we going to drive out the black market, or are we inviting those kinds of operators?
Right. So, yeah, I guess the state calls for taxing it on a per pound basis. 80% of what's grown here is exported. It'll continue to be exported, I think, or even more so. I think probably the best thing that any sort of, I've heard the statistic that 80% of the marijuana grown in the state is exported to other states where you can't grow quite like we can, because we have a very unique opportunity. I'm as passionate as all you guys. I'm just trying to keep this to, okay.
So interesting. So what he's talking about is it was legally allowed in the medical side. California opened up that market, so we probably had more, at least what appeared to be legitimate cultivation at some point. And so there may be some statistics that's being exported out. I think certainly the state doesn't envision that. We're not thinking about exports sort of in our market. We're looking at the product moving around in a marketplace through our licensees. But interesting statistic.
Right, and I guess it should be avoided. It's not, it becomes very illegal when you do that. But the business aspect, opportunity cost of not doing anything is huge. It's huge. The reason why California is a mecca is because we have a very unique climate. The amount of sun that we get throughout the year is almost unmatched, and this will always be a mecca. And San Joaquin County has always grown the state's premium crops, and it's a little hot, but this would be one of the best places to grow it. And I think that places like Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity County, Calaveras County, Nevada County are prolific grow areas is because the land is cheap and the people are kind of permissive. But if this county would allow it to happen, I think it would be a tremendous business opportunity for everybody, and for revenue for the county, for the county government would be great.
So on the threshold question, you're a yes. Yes, you think we should allow cannabis cultivation, and it sounds like because you're talking a lot about climate, a lot about weather, a lot about land, it sounds like you're leaning more toward an outdoor cultivation as being something you see as being the most appropriate for District 2 or our community. Is that kind of where? Right,
yeah, I'm a libertarian, so allow them to do whatever they want. From the growing perspective, I think indoor would be kind of foolish here, because at 16 cents a kilowatt hour, you're going to pay a lot in power unless you steal it.
So you're considering the energy use as the community consideration, but what about is it more secure indoor than outdoor?
Like Greg said, you have molds, you have powdery mildews, you have all sorts of other problems that affect the people, that affect the plants, the security issue. Honestly, a remoteness is a great security aspect. If people don't know where you're at, then they're not going to be able to rob you. I think that if it was totally free for people to do whatever they wanted, I think indoor wouldn't necessarily be a hot commodity in this county.
If it were open, do you think we should let those business operators decide what works best for their business model? Is that sort of a thought if we think about some areas of ag, some area of commercial, and some area of industrial?
I think people, okay. Landowners would probably maybe take care of the security on their own with dogs. Okay. Or whatever.
And maybe we could incentivize it like Greg was talking about. Let's go ahead and take Mondo. I do want to make sure we're getting everybody's comments on cultivation.
I believe it should be permitted all throughout. It's going to do what everybody thinks it's going to do. It's going to drive the price down, and if the price is down, that means the demand is down. And if everybody can do it, it's like telling your child, don't touch the red button. She's going to touch it. But if you say it's okay, more than that. But if you say it's okay to, she may touch that after a couple of hours. So right now there is a street value, but with the legalization, it's going to drop that street value to where it's going to make it to where you don't want to deal with that, because it's not going to be worth your time.
So kind of like alcohol, we had prohibition and sort of everybody wanted it and it was a big crime. And then as we legitimized it and it went into liquor stores, I know I don't have any neighbors growing hops. Is that kind of what you see?
Pretty much that's what I see. Because if you and your neighbors are growing it, it's gonna, like I believe at a meeting before, if you're gonna find someone who wants to harvest your plants for you, it's kind of hard to do that because you have to do it at the right time.
Okay. Now we've talked a lot about, I'm getting a lot of, we think cultivation is appropriate for San Joaquin County. We think sort of indoor, outdoor each have their own maybe cost benefits to an operator. There's certainly some security concerns, but it sounds like we've got some options to alleviate those or at least think about those. How do we feel about the question of whether medical cultivation or cultivation of cannabis that will ultimately enter the medical market versus cannabis that will ultimately enter the adult use or the recreational market? Should we treat those differently on the question of cannabis cultivation businesses? Should we regulate those differently? Should we allow, some in some areas and some in another? Should we say yes to one, no to one? What are their thoughts on that?
Hi, Zoe.
Hey, Zach.
I think as far as the county is concerned, which types of licenses to issue to licensees, I don't think it should be restricted or designated between recreational use and medical use. I think it's within the purview of the licensee when he's applying to the state.
So we should look at just cultivation in general, and that local approval holder should go to the state and decide which state license they want?
Correct.
Okay, so that's sort of looking at the dual license structure. Okay, I see what you're saying.
That said, there is some added virtue, I guess, and a benefit to encouraging development and cultivation of high CBD strains. Those are the types of strains that don't carry necessarily the euphoric effect that high THC strains do.
So the high CBD, meaning cannabinoid levels, and those are more used in the medical market because that's the medical aspect of the plant.
The high CBD products are more targeted to address medical issues, I guess, more so than high THC strains are.
Okay, so incentivizing those, there may be a value because those are going to a market who's more in need?
Yes.
Okay.
In short.
Okay. I'm pantomiming for the video. Wait,
Well-
did we? I do want to get that comment.
Okay. Sure.
I think with the CBD strains, people, like you said, want the euphoric feel of the marijuana, the THC. If they're CBD strains, they're useless to most people unless you make them into products for the medical
I see.
patients.
Though you can't actually see the difference in the plant itself. So if it were
No.
outdoor, it would be hard to identify.
It won't actually do much to you if you smoked it.
Right. Okay. Okay. And Greg has one more comment, and then I think we want to start to wrap up cultivation. We're not necessarily wrapping it up, but just be heads up, we're going to be moving toward the next license type.
On the commercial cultivation, I think they should definitely be able to do it in warehouse areas. I don't think the smell will be that big of a concern because it's an industrial area, not that many homes around. They have filters now to take the smell away.
Right. In fact, Mark just toured one, and you're right. It's an incredibly low odor when we're looking at those indoor. Really amazing, the
and it actually
technology.
comes out smelling out rose petals. They can have it flavored too. But so I think that's a good idea, and it's going to create a lot of jobs too because there's going to be a lot of electrical contractors brought in. There's going to be a lot of people, dirt, the bags, all the construction of it, and it's indoor. It's relatively safe on a big warehouse type thing because these guys are going to have cameras and everything. So it's the smaller operations that are in jeopardy.
Really great comment about the jobs. Really interesting question, right? So when we talk about economic benefit for the county, we talked about a patch tax. I think somebody else talked about a tax that comes in, certainly to the state, but maybe some local taxes similar to Stockton. But economically and just society, maybe even quality of life, some of these job opportunities, these are secure jobs, they're local jobs, that you see that certainly in the indoor because we've got a lot of infrastructure that would have to be built. That's an interesting, I think, important thing to raise.
You're going to have to address the issue too of when they transport this stuff too, it's going to create jobs, because I feel that in the transporting of this, it's going to be like Brinks trucks. This stuff's worth a lot of money. There's going to be people hitting cars. They're going to find out when your delivery is going to come in. They're going to be waiting for you. So that's going to create jobs. You're going to need like a Brinks delivery.
We have a transport licensee.
Laws on that, how it's transported.
So he's really thinking about how that market interplays. Go ahead, let's get her a mic. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. You go ahead, and then Rosa, if you can get your mic to this young lady. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I apologize in advance because most of you are going to hate me when I say what I have to say.
No, this is a totally judgment-free zone. We want input from pro, con, you name it.
I've just made a few ambient comments as this thing is going on.
If you can keep that mic so that we're really capturing your comments.
I'm
Thank
a
you.
retired federal officer. And I spent 21 years on the street, working 41 counties in Northern California. And I visited virtually every lockup from Bakersfield to the Oregon border and out into Nevada.
Okay.
And I'm kind of conflicted here because I was an advocate for marijuana when I was a college student 45 years ago. I was one of the proponents of the original marijuana initiative.
Oh my.
So
You look good, sir.
between those two bumpers, take these comments. Marijuana is a very simple, elegant thing. Why would we want to mess it up with government in any way, shape, or form? You think you can do it better than the people we lock up? Why shouldn't you be locked up? This is a new gold rush by the county and the people who think they have a right to profit from this very simple, elegant thing that any fool can grow in his backyard. I drive around this town in September and October. I pull up to a stoplight out at, how about the corner of Davis Road and Thornton Road? There's a big grow out there. I smell it at the stoplight. Nobody interferes with it. You talk about locations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear anybody complaining about the sex offenders counseling group next door to an elementary school in Dantoni Park.
Okay.
You really ought to be concerned about that.
I think we are concerned about that
okay.
now that you've raised it.
What do you bet armed robbers who robbed people in the street in front of or just down the block from Kathy's house last year
Okay.
were under the influence? I've already said that. There have been thousands of grows found in national forests and
Yes.
national parks. The folks who gave you this law are the same ones who don't want me to be able to defend myself. I've known a lot of people who used over the years. Let me give you a few.
Okay.
And I know the average person who favors the use of this crap is going to say, oh my God, how dare he try and connect those dots.
No one's going to try and do that, but I do want to keep comments to should San Joaquin County allow these businesses, and then how you see that regulation. It sounds like you're thinking minimal regulation, which is fine.
Absolutely
Just keep
no
that,
commercial enterprise whatsoever.
Okay, so
Any
you're no
fool
on the
can
threshold
grow
question.
6 plants in his backyard.
Okay.
Any fool can hand it to his next door neighbor.
Under state law, we can't grow outside. That is one of the questions we're going to talk about later is, should the county say, yes, state, we can't ban 6 plants indoor, but do we also want to allow that outdoor? So that's an interesting, we'll get to that in the personal, but go ahead.
Okay. I worked a case several years ago. I won't say specifically where, but up in the North State.
Okay.
And I got to admit that a lot of the guys that I worked with had mental health issues.
Okay.
Now, I don't know whether the mental health issues came from the dope or were just exacerbated by it. But this guy under the influence, removed his appendage
Okay,
with a
bring,
steak
and
knife.
if you can bring that back around to how we want to think about that in policy, it's going to be helpful. Otherwise, it's a little beyond the scope.
Well, I understand,
Still
but
below the
I'm
belt.
going to connect some dots for
Sorry.
you. I had a couple of real good buddies at the college. These were guys who advocated with me.
Okay.
One of them died a couple of years ago, and I will grant you that he smoked cigarettes. But he also smoked marijuana his entire adult life. And his death certificate says an unknown, undiagnosed fungus was growing in his lungs. It killed him.
Okay.
And then I'm thinking about another guy, one of my best friends a long time ago. And admittedly, when he did the second-degree murder, he wasn't under the influence of marijuana. He was a tweaker. But
Okay.
when you think about the people I interviewed in all those jails, all those prisons,
Right.
how many of them started with marijuana?
So you bring up the question of a gateway drug, and certainly the drug itself has some inherent risks, and we absolutely, that is above my pay scale. But the state has said it's legal. So our question is, do we in our community, and specifically tonight in District 2, do we want to say, state, we recognize that and we know we have to let people grow within their homes, but we're not going to allow it in any other way? Or alternatively, we do want to allow it, but in a way to protect people like your friend, or protect people in other ways. So kind of where do we land
let's
on
carry
that?
this one step further, because I have friends in law enforcement and retired law enforcement, and you'd be amazed how many of them use too.
So do you find a value for the medical use or for the PTSD use? And where do you think we should use that information? Should we value that also and put that in policy, or should we not?
Some
What is your
people
thoughts?
tell me that they can't go to sleep without it.
Okay, so there may be a sleep aid.
It's a PTSD
I've been
thing.
told that my talking can also be used as a sleep aid.
Think about what a cop does on the street and how
Okay.
jacked up he is. You know, at night, maybe a couple of toots on the pipe.
But sir, I want to bring this back around. Where do you land at the end of those notes on whether we should or shouldn't allow it in our community?
Any person ought to be allowed to grow 6 plants in their backyard.
So personal
and they
and
ought to be
outdoor.
allowed
Okay.
to defend it with the castle concept.
Okay, so that goes beyond the scope, but you're thinking personal, not commercial, and oh, sorry Siri, and adding instead of just the indoor and outdoor. So we're going to add those comments also on
Well,
personal cultivation.
let me
And then
carry
do we
this
have any other
a
comments
step
on
further.
commercial cannabis cultivation?
As far as I'm concerned, this is nothing more than a tax grab and the government getting into the dope business.
Fair enough. And certainly there are some who we have had that raised. Is there anybody who thinks that we should allow it but not tax it? Or not
Can I-
have a
can I-
revenue
can I
source?
just add 2 more
Libertarian
comments?
David. Okay, we have another libertarian.
Can I add just 2 more comments?
Yes.
When did you ever see government improve anything?
I think we bring value, but I definitely see your point.
Okay, and the final thing, if you're going to do this, what we really need to do is we need to come up with a new law, same as 5150 of the Health and Safety Code.
Okay.
Any person apprehended under the influence of marijuana ought to be detained for a minimum of 72 hours at own expense for psychiatric evaluation, because they are a danger to the community, and we currently have no standard with which to judge them.
Interesting. Okay. So we'll make that note that there's some similarity there. We're going to go ahead and move on to commercial cannabis business comments. Let's get her. Oh, yep. You have been waiting. You have been very patient. And then she's going to pass that down to you. Appreciate everybody's patience. Good job, you guys. Thank you. Go ahead.
Quick question. Is this just for District 2 or for the county?
Good question. So the question, the cannabis policy project is for all of the unincorporated county. And I think we had some slides up before you came in, and that was that our cannabis policy project, what we'll do is we'll report to the Board of Supervisors, and we're going to do that in August. They will give us direction on a policy, and that policy, if they allow any or whatever that policy is, goes into effect only in the unincorporated county, which means the area around cities. So the city of Stockton has their own policy. This would just go into effect in the unincorporated county.
Okay.
So I often point up here as to District 2, because tonight we're mainly talking about District 2, but the project is the unincorporated county. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my concern is addressing how Stockton and the San Joaquin County as a whole is very much
Perfect.
a food desert, and I am concerned in programs such as Puentes/Boggs Tract. Fathers and families just got their own little plot of land to grow food. Raised Roots, run by Jamil Burns, running in Roberts Island.
Right.
They're programs that are growing food for the community, a malnourished community they bring not only good food, so like fresh produce, but
Right.
in an accessible and affordable manner. So I'm just wondering, how is this going to affect those programs? Because I'm not sure. I know Raised Roots is in ag land, but
Correct.
the other ones might be in commercial or industrial, whichever one. So that's my concern. Also, how accessible is this process going to be for people to take on? Because when you mentioned crime and being concerned about crime, but the people that we usually think about when we say marijuana related crime, is this going to be accessible for them?
Do you mean the allowance of business is accessible for them?
Right. Or is this just going to be another measure, like the gentrification of marijuana?
Okay.
'Cause I
So
hear-
so awesome comments, and I want to address them, and I know that you're next, but we're going to address these. These are comments that have not been raised at any previous workshop, and I will tell you, I do not have an answer for those questions as far as even having considered policy options. Are they important questions? Oh my gosh, they're huge. So her first comment in regards to, we have areas of our community that are food deserts, and that is absolutely true. So there's a few questions about how this interacts. And remember, we don't have the answers. We're getting input from you. So to the extent that you look at that issue and say, hey, Zoe and Mark, here's something I think you could put into policy. If you allow cultivation, and if you allow it in the ag zone, could you incentivize, some sort of ag food production to go with it? Or could you not allow it in certain areas like the Boggs Tract, or where farmers are committed to growing to meet a food desert issue? Is there a way to interact that way? Absolutely. I think there's some options. Are Mark and I going to creatively come up with all of those all by ourselves? Heck no. So submit some information on that. Today and tonight you are, and we're taking note of that. But that food desert question is really interesting. Anybody else thought about that? Right? Oh yeah, okay, Zach's thought about that. So it is really interesting. And I think there is a big question about, and I think somebody else raised this, when we allow it into the ag, do we displace food crops? Do we displace crops that are otherwise participating in a food market because we are, as a farmer, as a parcel owner, as a county, maybe valuing the money over sort of the quality of life question of ag or of meeting people's needs within the underprivileged community? And we don't have the answer for that, but should we consider it in the policy project? Absolutely, because that's a quality of life question. And also, let's be honest, it's an economics question, isn't it? So yes, I think those are important questions. Have we thought of it enough? No. Are we going to think about it now more? Yes. And then on the second question, access. I will tell you an anecdote, and that's that we were talking to the district attorney because we've talked to, community stakeholders and department heads, and she said that she often, and think about the important issues that our DA faces. So she gets really important questions all the time. One of the questions she gets a lot, and this really blew my mind, a lot. She will be at a symposium or at a meeting and talking about, murders and crime rates and, prosecutorial discretion, and the question that she gets is, if you you being the county, open it up for cannabis business, how do you make sure those business owners are diverse, are not gentrification of cannabis, but instead we have female cannabis business owners, low-income cannabis, or are we going to have a patch tax that's so high that people can't enter the market? I don't have an answer for that. Is that important to our Board of Supervisors? Yes, they have articulated that it is important, but how do we do that? I don't know. So definitely, if you have some ideas, submit those comments onto the website. If anyone else has some ideas, we still are at the threshold question of should we allow cannabis businesses? That next step is, if we do, how and where, and boy, in that how and where, who is also a really important question. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry I don't have like a, yes, we nailed that issue. We haven't. We're taking input in, so go ahead.
Hi, Christina. I think we should legalize.
Okay.
And I will not be able to stay much longer, so I'll just add not just
Great.
Cultivation, but manufacturing, distribution specifically.
Okay.
I know Calaveras County is poised to further their conversation on legalization of cultivation. San Joaquin County is already a hub for distribution. This would make a tremendous economic impact on our area.
You mean in non-cannabis, we are already doing distribution and
Yes.
logistics. Okay, and so you see that as fitting right in?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that it would take very little effort for us to expand and be able to capitalize on this new growing industry.
Okay.
I do think it has to be taxed. You have to mitigate the impacts. I think it needs to be a reasonable tax. I am a business owner. I want business-friendly taxes, but when you look at studies coming out of areas like Humboldt County, there is impacts to families, specifically to children, and we will have to handle those impacts. You will have, at least initially, inspections and higher safety concerns that I totally agree, it will drive out the black market, and it will taper down, and we should respond appropriately. And also for education campaigns, and not only maternal, but also youth. We've proven through the taxes generated from cigarettes that you can educate the public on the threats, and we've reduced smoking so much that the funds that were generated through that proposition to help pay for First Five funding have dwindled when they started at 35 million down to 9 million. So we actually have far fewer smokers than we did, and therefore we know education campaigns work. So I don't think that these need to be.
And those were funded from the business itself, similar to the model you're thinking will work for cannabis. Interesting analogy.
And I love that you're holding opportunities for the industry to come. I know that the industry is very interested in working with government, having good government policies, being a good neighbor. I think those discussions can be profitable for everyone. But I think we have to be honest and understand there will be impacts to children and families, and those have to be handled. And if we don't tax it, we're going to pay for it with an already strained budget.
Right. That's interesting. And you're right as far as the industry, and we're really interested in what is that reasonable, because we need those. I mean, if a business is allowed and we tax it or burden it so much it doesn't survive, then that doesn't help us. Is kind of your thought too. And boy, we've successfully educated ourselves out of funds in the cigarette market, haven't we? Great analogy on a model that works. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up the cannabis business cultivation section. I will tell you, we got comments within this that we've never gotten before, and so I really feel good that we're adding new information, and not necessarily specific to District 2, but certainly within District 2. All right, thanks, you guys. Yes.
So just two quick ones. The profit that a farmer can make on an acre of wheat is about $500. On marijuana, an acre could be $10 million. The taxes to the county would be huge. You could feed millions of people if you just moderately taxed cannabis in this county. The second economic point was it's an inelastic good. Okay, so once everybody starts growing with gusto in this state, which they're already doing, when the supply doubles, the consumption won't double. Inelastic means it's kind of like cigarettes. People smoke their pack a day, or they already have access to marijuana, and they're going to continue to smoke their marijuana. So what I think would be great for this county is to distinguish themselves as a great place that grows regulated, safe, healthy, clean, high quality, good marijuana that people are going to choose over all the other inferior options, because they're not going to start smoking so much more or whatever. So
Interesting.
So that is a point to not tax as much and let the businesses and cultivators grow competitively.
Well, the other thing is, it was interesting, he used the 1 acre, and certainly the state limits the growth, which may help us address sort of the displacement of food, not necessarily in and of itself, but something that we would want to think about. So that's interesting that the profit is high enough that we may not be displacing. Christine, thank you so much for your comments. I appreciate it. All right. So now we're talking about retail and dispensary, and I think, the issues with retail and dispensary are different, and I think in some ways they are not quite as large, and we've lived with dispensaries for a long time, but that doesn't mean that they're not important to discuss. So this next type of business, as defined again by state license, part of the dual license structure would require local approval and then a state license. Though those don't have to be an exact mirror. We've heard some comments tonight. The county can allow or prohibit cannabis retail stores. Remember, what we're talking about is the unincorporated county areas. So certainly each city within the county, as the board envisioned in 2008, could allow those, and potentially those would then be in the population structures, population centers, or alternatively, we could say we do want to allow them, and pursuant to our general plan, we would want to allow them in areas where people are existing county communities. Alternatively, or not alternatively, in addition, when we consider whether to allow them at all, we can allow or not allow each of those dispensary retail businesses to have mobile dispensaries or not, to allow from their hard and fast concrete location to allow delivery. So it's not just for pizza anymore. The county can allow that, but doesn't have to. And finally, a retail can be allowed to have on-site consumption or not. So it could be a vape lounge. It could allow their people on site to participate like a bar, or alternatively, you could say you can be a retail dispensary store, but you can't allow people to partake on site. So those are just some options that the county will ultimately be considering in its discussion of retail and dispensary locations. Retail and dispensary locations are by definition commercial. They are a store. Or in the medical market, they're kind of a pharmacy, right? Well, that is located in the commercial zones. Those are the appropriate locations for a store. There have been discussions of micro business. There's also some discussion at other workshops, and we're going to get into this, is this idea of, I have said by our general plan, they are a store and they are commercial. But is there a model where something like the Ghirardelli factory, where they have a store connected to a large industrial, could we allow those to coexist in a space and just say, okay, but the retail portion has to meet parking standards and all of that? That's an option. So I want to put that on the table in addition to this model that says, here's your commercial zones in District 2. So again, we consider our community considerations. Odor, which we know can be minimized, but is at issue with cannabis. Security, we've had this raised more like a liquor store, obviously, than talking about having a site rated like a cultivation site. So again, different security concerns, but they still exist. And we have also had, what I always think is really interesting on this question, is this idea of like a jewelry store. It's open to the public and has a high value product, but it somehow manages to meet security concerns, and it does it because that's certainly in the business's interest. That's also in the community's interest and in the county's interest to protect people. So again, security is at issue. Water, less of an issue. Energy, less of an issue, but we always want to be thinking about our community considerations. Building code and safety issues, certainly they'd apply. Do we need to add some more? Costs, available location, again, commercial or alternatively potentially in combination with some industrial. We don't know the answer to that. Buffer zones, county fees, and enforcement. Can we enforce in these? Certainly, I think enforcement's less of an issue with dispensaries than when we're talking about an ag zone, right? Any just questions on retail and dispensaries, and then we'll get to discussion points. So just questions.
Just a question. Is it possible to make the retail and the dispensary one and the same thing? That seems like it'd be easier, because I think some states, if I'm not mistaken, like Colorado, when you go in, if you have the medical card, you get it at a more reasonable rate. And then if you're just recreational, then you pay a different price.
It's a good question, Greg.
So
and
maybe that would save.
It's a really good question. Unfortunately, we don't really have the answer of what we are able to do at the local level yet. We expect to get that soon. The way that the schemes are set up is we've got a medical scheme that has a testing requirement that is different than the adult use scheme. There are some sale requirements. The taxes are different. So again, the medical schemes set up by the state and the adult use schemes set up by the state are similar but not identical. We don't know whether the state regulations, and I have to admit they came out on Friday, but my daughter was a flower girl in a wedding, and so I have not reviewed those regulations over the weekend as I planned. She was adorable. Thank you. So as those come out, we expect some of that question to be answered, but right now we don't have an answer to that, because exactly what you're saying in Colorado, what you do is you go in and you get a medical grade product and you might get it at a different rate, but can those be co-located? We don't know. So similar to the question of cultivation, what may be an option, and we're hoping to get some input on, is does it make sense to you guys that if you, yes, are going to allow it in your community, San Joaquin County, you should just say yes to dispensaries and retail in these areas and let the business operator attempt to get a state license, and in getting their state license, they have to meet whatever the state has outlined on co-location of adult and medical, on making sure that a medical patient comes in and gets a medical grade product instead of a recreational grade product. So should we take a bigger view and say, go ahead as long as it's in these zones, or should we take a more narrow view and say, we're only going to allow medical, we're only going to allow adult, and here's how the state has set your standards? I don't have the answer, but it's an interesting question, and it's a question that exists at the state level. So we'll see. Sorry. You always want to be able to answer a question, right? Any other questions on dispensary retail? And again, we're using that name, but we're talking about essentially the same thing, a store where you're able to buy either medical or adult use cannabis. Go ahead.
Where do these big enterprises, like the tobacco companies, where do the tobacco companies fit into all of this? Because my understanding is they're gearing up to sell us products, and they don't want any of this kind of organization. They want it on their own terms.
Well, the state articulated as it formulated the legislation, the state did articulate and put value on local and smaller operators, and that's certainly why we've got smaller cultivation sites, and the state has consistently laid that out as part of the medical and the adult use scheme. In both of those, they said we want to see, small, and I'm going to use the term local operators, because that idea of large corporate, Philip Morris, 10,000 acres of cannabis was not what legislatures envisioned. And so the structure they've created, those cultivation sites are small sites. Having local requirement for a local approval, that would mean that the locals have to decide whether they're going to let in those corporations. So the state has said, locals, you decide, but we are valuing small and local operators. So what that ultimately looks like, I don't know, but that's how the schemes are starting out. So I don't know what Philip Morris is going to do or wants to do. That's part of our question tonight, right? Do you guys want to see us incentivize local operators? Is there a way to do that fairly under the law? Or do you say, hey, as long as it's in this location or that location, or it's an open market, go for it? That's what we want to hear from you. Any other questions on dispensaries retail? You're just gearing up for comment? You're coming in for a question? Bob?
So the license class 6 and above comes into effect like the larger grows, was it like 2022?
At this point, there's not a type 6. I believe it's type 5. And that is, I believe, 2023. And that's 5 acres or more. And at this point, there's not a cap. But we don't know what that'll shape up to be. And that's part of the gearing up is probably under type 5. But we don't know. We don't know what that's going to look like, and we've got some time for local small operators to take hold, to get market share. And again, I'm not talking as an advocate, but that's my understanding of how the state has set up the structure in an attempt to allow that to happen.
Okay. Oh, and I'm sorry. Well, did you say that 6 plants are currently allowed by the state. The state says that you can, the county cannot deny it, but currently somebody could have them indoors right now and they would not be breaking the
Under
law.
the adult use law, anyone over 21 is allowed to grow, and we're going to go through this at the end. We've got a whole section on personal cultivation because it's really important when you're talking about quality of life and community. It's very separate from the businesses, though, as far as impacts. So 6 plants, indoor, over 21, or in an accessory structure, but not outdoor. So there's some limitations, but
Okay.
we'll get to that.
Thank you.
Good question. All right. Any other questions? All right, let's look at what the discussion looks like on dispensaries and retail. How do you feel about permitting commercial cannabis retail businesses in your community? It's that same threshold question. Should we allow them at all? If yes, then should we be treating medical retail businesses differently from adult use businesses? And like I told Greg, we don't actually know how that shapes up, but do you think it's maybe okay to have a medical because it's like a pharmacy, and not okay to have recreational? Or do you think, hey, the adult use is like having a liquor store and, let's go straight adult? Or do you want to see it open to both? So that's that question, not necessarily on the state details, but instead just as a value scheme, or maybe incentivize one over the other. So this is our discussion on dispensary retail. Let's go ahead and open it up.
Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Zach.
I think the county should definitely allow retail dispensaries to operate in its jurisdiction. I think with the state mandated labeling standards, along with the mandated lab testing of products prior to reaching the consumer at retail, regulation of the retail market is going to assure safe access for the consumers.
Okay.
I think also, given the security requirements that are going to be implemented into these businesses, we're talking about comprehensive surveillance coverage, potentially, on-site security guards, 100% transparency with local law enforcement agencies, even to the extent of some collaboration between the operators and law enforcement, that the establishment of these businesses in these communities will actually serve to make those communities safer.
Okay.
Another consideration from an economic standpoint is by allowing dispensaries in conjunction with commercial cultivators and manufacturers, you're creating a local outlet for those products that are going to be produced en masse. And you're also providing a safe and convenient retail outlet for your local consumers who would otherwise go outside of your jurisdiction and spend their money to conduct the same type of activity within the comfort of their own home.
So when you think about that product movement slide, what you're saying is that if we allowed cultivation but not dispensaries, then we're growing it and we're sending it away. And so you want to see that product movement slide. You want to see that product stay local, or you think there's a value in that?
I do. I think
Okay.
you are creating a local market to serve your local retail consumer, as opposed to sending them out of the jurisdiction to get that product.
And is that both medical and adult use?
Yes.
Do you see there being a value in incentivizing one over the other or allowing one over the other?
I don't. I think it should be strictly within the purview of the operator as to which type of license he wants to go ahead, he or she wants to go ahead and apply for, in the event that there is, a remaining separate licensing structure for medical and for recreational.
Does anyone think there's security issues with one that wouldn't exist with the other? Go ahead. I mean, Walgreens sells both of them. Mondo's got our, yeah, get a mic. Okay.
Sorry, I
And
mean, that
that's-
was going to be my point. Rite Aid does it, CVS does it. They don't differentiate the two. You can go get your children's Robitussin, and then you can go get your adult cough medicine from behind the counter.
Okay.
It's just a different label, different structure, but sold out of the same store.
And they have, even though they have a product that is valuable potentially on the black market, that's mitigated by the security measures? Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Greg.
I think a dispensary or a club is more apt to probably have trouble than a big Walgreens outlet because of the nature of the product there. Walgreens, you're only going to go in there, they're going to want the Dilaudid and the heroin substitutes of Vicodin. But with the club, there's so much more volume, such a bigger haul monetarily, I would think. So they're in danger. And then to back up his point on the, for years, Oakland people, I've known hundreds of people that go to Oakland to get their clones and get their medicine. I mean, millions of dollars have been going that way to the Bay Area when it could be staying right here in this county. So I think that county should act on this, and the longer we sleep, the lamer we look.
But Greg, that was interesting because you said actually a dispensary is potentially more of a target for crime, but then in the next breath you said, but we should have one here instead of Oakland. Do you think that?
Yeah, because driving down the roads, you get hit by flying an airplane, you get killed. Life is dangerous, period. Our forefathers came here for freedom. Okay, that's what the country's founded. They'd be rolling over in their graves right now. They saw this misuse.
Okay.
It's freedom. There's a danger in everything.
And that risk benefit is borne by the operator. Is that your thought?
Well, I just think it's a personal choice of how much danger you want to put yourself in.
But what if you open one next door to my house or my daycare? Did I make that risk benefit for you to have a dispensary? Is that fair?
Well, it wouldn't be next to a daycare because we'd have the 1,000-footer.
Oh, good point. Okay,
right.
So my pottery business.
But if it was next to your house and it was legal, the voters have spoken. You have to deal with it. If you don't like the smell, and you talk to me and we're trying, most people like the smell. Very few people don't like it. So what your problem next door would be, I don't understand. Somebody jumping the fence to security that they might go through your yard.
Right, so there's an armed robbery of a dispensary, and in fact, my pottery business is next door, because get it, pot and pottery.
Right.
I know, that was awesome, huh? It's better than the daycare example. So we have my pottery business is next door to you decide to buy a parcel and open a dispensary. And given you have made the risk benefit analysis, but in fact the state has said, San Joaquin County, you don't have to allow this. So even though you're saying you're right, it's legal, the county can say, no, we're not going to put people at that risk. Or should we mitigate that risk somehow? What do you think about that?
The convenience of a store, the benefit to the public, the taxes, all of that combined way outweighs that it might get robbed a little higher percentage in a liquor store or something.
Okay, so you're looking at the
I'm just bringing
cost-benefit
that up.
analysis.
I think it's a little more dangerous, but all the benefits, the taxes, the convenience for the people, putting the black market down and not letting them sell as much. Besides, their stuff's no good anymore, the stuff from Mexico. They can't compete with us. That's why the black market's going out, because they don't have anything good.
Okay, so you're talking about a cost-benefit analysis. Any other comments on retail dispensary outlets, again, that we're looking at probably in the commercial zones, but also potentially in the industrial? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
I think that it should be allowed in the county, both the retail business. I agree with Zach here that I don't think that the medical and the adult use should be really distinguished or enforced by the county.
Okay,
That
for
should be-
policy purposes necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that should stay at the state level. But I do want to make a comment on we're looking at these in the commercial areas.
Correct.
But I think that you made I like your example of the like a Ghirardelli factory, right? You're producing,
Not that I go there and get extra hot fudge and whipped cream on a regular basis.
with cherry on top, right?
Yeah, I've actually read about people who go there.
So I think that that's a great thought, and I think that should be allowed in an industrial area where you could have cultivation, but then also given the proper security, different everything, to also have a dispensary with that location. I think that it could.
Why do you see that as a benefit? Tell me about why you think that's a good idea.
I think that it's.
Besides the fact that I said it first.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead, tell me.
Yeah, I think that it provides a value for people to kind of know, one, they can kind of see this is locally grown. Some of the products that are in the dispensary are, there are jobs provided from the community or jobs provided to the community in the cultivation of this product.
Interesting.
And
So they're
it's
actually
right
seeing
here.
it. That's an interesting point about that. Okay.
Yeah, may or may not see, just depending on security measures of what they can see.
Okay.
But I think that I don't really see where it should not be allowed to have a dispensary in an industrial area.
Okay, and usually those zones do not allow public access because there's issues with trucks. The infrastructure isn't made necessarily for lots of members of the public coming in. There's not usually parking at the same way. But on the other hand, if there's a value and those things could be addressed, do you think you're saying you think there's a value in having those businesses co-located? They can share security. They may be
Yes,
other benefits.
and parking, and also just having it maybe in a maybe kind of taking away some of the concerns from the pottery business owner who doesn't want it right next door to her business.
Okay, good point. So
kind of
maybe it
taking
doesn't fit in
out.
that strip mall as well as it fits there.
Yeah, it can be in
Okay.
a separate kind of area, maybe a little out of the way, but still
But
providing
still
for the
within our community.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I was going to show you, but right. So maybe not here, but still somewhere within our existing community.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments on dispensaries and retail businesses, commercial cannabis businesses? And then we're going to get to the logistics subtypes, which I think are really interesting in the San Joaquin County discussion.
My apologies, but I'm going to say it anyway. I was doing an interview in a nearby state prison one day, and I asked this guy after he got out, he only gets a little bit of gate money to hit the street with, not enough to rent a motel for a couple of days.
Okay.
And I said to him, well, what are you going to do when you hit the street? He says, well, in my neighborhood, there's a dispensary. And, if I hit a couple of people going over there to get their dope, he says, I can get $100, $200, enough to get me through the weekend, no sweat.
Well,
and the cops don't come.
Well, we're certainly not going to be able to solve the problem of the existing criminal element. But one thing that has been raised at multiple workshops is the interesting question of existing dispensaries may not call, or people who are attempting to buy either on the black market or at a dispensary may not call law enforcement because there is a potential that maybe you don't think their recommendation will be recognized, or maybe right now they're in that black market, that dispensary isn't legal. Isn't sort of the discussion today the discussion of whether we should bring that market into an existing legal market, which is what the state has said we want to have in California, and then when someone calls the police, they will come? Isn't that part of the discussion? I'm not advocating one way or another, but I do think your story paints an interesting picture and might actually be saying, hey, bring it into an existing marketplace, a legal marketplace, so people can call the police and have the protection that certainly we want our citizens to have. So I don't mean to misinterpret your story, but I think that story goes both ways. Okay, so I appreciate the comment. Any other comments on, yes?
Yeah, I think if you just have the dispensary and the industrial, it'll be more isolated, so there would be more chances of robberies or something there. I'm not saying that it would be in a strip mall all the way where there's, not over here by BJ's or anything like that, but where they're located right now is kind of okay. And
You mean the ones existing in Stockton?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like kind of visible, so if you see someone getting robbed, you can call someone. You don't have to go help or nothing, but still it's like kind of
Interesting
visible.
point. Okay, interesting
But if
point.
you're going way out in
public are
the
coming in and out.
industrial, you don't know who's hiding behind there, if they're coming for the grow, it's just pretty much easier. You can take it all.
Okay. I kind of like that about Ghirardelli because no one sees me leave with the, banana split that I'm totally taking home to other people who are going to share it with me. But that's an interesting point, and I definitely, Jeffrey is going to mark that down because that hasn't been part of the co-located businesses. And I don't mean write it down because we're not necessarily going to allow them to co-locate, but potentially co-locate, we need to, if we're going to look in that direction, think about those extra security concerns. But on the other hand, there may be some benefits. So it's interesting. None of it's easy, right? It's not black and white. It's green. Go ahead, Zach. And then we'll wrap up dispensaries and retail.
I think the particular regulations with respect to like any prospective receipt of a use permit for the operation of one of these businesses, the potential vulnerabilities that exist for one of those businesses, given the specific zoning, under which they're going to be designated, you have to enact regulations that are specific to that particular business and specific to that particular zone. That's an interesting point that he raised, in that some of these industrial areas are a little more, I don't want to call them rural, but a little more isolated than, say, a commercial zone. So perhaps requiring one of those businesses to have a roving patrol or multiple on-site security to address that potential vulnerability.
And so in a lot of ways, your thought is that we can mitigate it. we can meet that, or that the business has an incentive in and of itself to not have people getting robbed at its business, and so it may be incentivized to do that as well. And if it's not, we need to address it.
And it's location specific.
Okay, and so that location specific means we may want to consider a use permit example, which would allow us to meet those specific site needs. So this particular parcel is more isolated, we would add conditions on that, where we wouldn't necessarily add conditions on a site that is located in a strip mall. Are those some of the things we might want to make sure we're getting down?
I think that'd be a fair approach.
Okay. I want to go ahead and move on to the logistic license types, but if your story does not involve a prison, then you can totally make that comment.
There are businesses where we require security or gates or other kind of controlled entrances.
Right.
And a dispensary or a commercial outlet of whatever status could easily accommodate. I mean, the kind of money that's going through these places, they can afford a private cop.
And so, in fact, I think you raise a really good point. Our question in our professional workshops needs to be, hey, can your business be viable with an extra gate or with a roving security? And the answer, yes or no, and then maybe working with them to say, we have a minimum threshold of security. Can you meet that? Then this might be a business type board of supervisors that may weigh out in the cost benefit analysis, and then they will ultimately make that decision. So really good input. That's a really good point. And it didn't involve a prison.
Legitimate use permit requirement.
Right. Using that discretion, which is why we have a planning commission, which is why that really is something we haven't raised before, but we've been talking about swaths of zones, and in fact, we can be looking at individual site applications and discretion. So I think that's a very good point, and one that the industry folks are nodding their heads at too. All right, so we're going to move on. We've covered cultivation and dispensary, which are the most volatile types, because people are really looking at businesses, people are really thinking about security. Now we're going to get to the logistic types, which again, I raised this issue. I think these are really incredibly interesting in the San Joaquin County discussion. And so, and what we're going to do, and I'm going to take your question in just a second. We're going to talk through manufacture, testing, distribution, and transportation. We're going to allow for questions after each, and then we're going to wrap up with a discussion of all four of these together. And the reason is that they have similar community impacts, similar community concerns, and similar ways to mitigate those concerns. And so I think talking about them as a group is more meaningful, and we actually get better input. But we are going to take questions after each one, because each has their own sort of set of, why did the state do that? So go ahead. Oh yeah, thank you, Rosa. I'm getting a little loose with the mic, aren't I? I'm like, go ahead. All right, go ahead.
Quick question. I don't know if it was part of the last piece, number 2, on-site use.
Yeah, that is one of the questions for dispensaries and retail. And you're right. Okay. We didn't really address it. Do you have a thought on it?
I do have a thought.
Thank you for raising it, by the way.
Yeah, I kind of see it, again, with if people are doing it responsibly, right? But I see it similar to wine tasting. You go to a winery, they're growing the wine, they're having a tasting, a bar where you can taste the wine, and then you can make your purchase and safely go home with your designated driver.
Right, you're still expected or required to follow the law when leaving.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really interesting analogy to wine tasting. Some people think of it more like a bar, but even in a bar, you could see that as being analogous in that you can partake in a product that we sell, and then you're responsible for abiding by the law when you leave. That's how you see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that question of on-site consumption? In the back. Rose is going to get you the mic. You're like the farthest point, so to get the mic to you.
With that model, like the Ghirardelli, how would you track and trace? And like the model with testing, you test the product and you buy it there. How would you track and trace and tax that?
The operator will have to track and trace everything. They will be responsible for that. And if we do allow a business, we certainly will have compliance audits, making sure they're complying with state law. So in a track and trace, so in wine tasting, I'm not actually buying that wine, I'm being tasting. So they may not be able to give you a a puff and pass to the left at the next person, you would have to buy it for on-site consumption, so they would track it to you as the end user. So it's not analogous to wine tasting necessarily in that I get to have a puff and then ultimately decide that I want to buy that bigger thing, that joint. Or so. And that's fine. But on the track and trace, you have to actually track that end user and that purchase, and that amount. And so he's raising really good points, utilizing the state law that's existing. And you're right. But it is analogous in that I may want to purchase a little bit of, 209 gold and purchase a little bit of, I'm not going to try and come up with another example, and purchase a little bit of this and consume some on site. And in that sense, it's similar. So, and the question is often really, do we see this similar to a bar? Do we see it similar to wine tasting? Or in fact, do we want this only to exist as a pharmacy model where you probably shouldn't go ahead and take your Vicodin or try a, Dilaudid there on site?
We don't permit people to go into a liquor store and step outside and pop open a 24.
So you would see it more, you would like to see it, or sort of one thing you want us to note is that maybe a more effective model is to have it look like a liquor store as opposed to look like a bar or a wine bar.
I don't care what the substance is, that if it inebriates you,
okay,
and you step outside on a public sidewalk, you ought to be arrested.
Interesting. Okay, so in a bar, the expectation is that one not imbibe so much that they're inebriated, or certainly they can't operate a car. But that's interesting because under that model, certainly I would not have made it through college, but also most bars, somebody raised BJ's, that's a bar and grill, and I would guess that a lot of people leave there above the legal limit to drive, but are able to walk on the sidewalk. Is that a model that you don't think should exist in our community? Outside the car. And that's illegal, and that would be illegal with a dispensary and a retail. Yeah, certainly you can't use it on the sidewalk. No public consumption under state law. Go ahead, and then we're going to move on to logistics.
Is there any potentials of just having like a smoke lounge similar to a hookah lounge?
Yes, the state has the model. I believe it's actually a dispensary, because if you're going to buy it, it's not a BYOC. You can't bring your own cannabis, but you can in fact buy it in certain dispensary retails, and that license type is a dispensary retail license type, and then you can consume on site like a vape lounge, like a cigar lounge. They see it the same way. That's how the state looks at it, and also ultimately, and we've had some great comments at these workshops about, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of ways you could use cannabis in other ways. So we had someone come, he was a chef, and said, I want to use cannabis in the food that I cook and prepare, and he's a caterer. And so has the state thought of that model or put that? No, they haven't. But is that something that could or should exist under state law, and maybe could and should exist if we have sort of a more generic allowance? Well, yeah, it probably could. We haven't been putting it into the PowerPoints, but we would expect those types of things to come up that would require a dual license structure. That chef, for example, or that, hookah type lounge that mirrors the cigar lounge, they would have to get a dispensary license. Would they also have to have a restaurant license if they're a restaurant? Yes. Would they also have to have, some other kind of license? Potentially, yes. And all of those laws still would apply, and they'd be limited by those approvals and permits. Let's go ahead and move on to the logistic license types. Go ahead.
Would they be permitted to discharge the smoke into the common air?
Would they be permitted to discharge the smoke into the common air? Under state law, the smoke is treated almost identically to cigarette smoke. So any place that cigarette consumption is not allowed, cannabis is not allowed. There are certainly some issues in a shared air system, and we're going to talk about that in the personal. If you have apartments that have shared air system, do we need to address that? We probably do. But similar to a bar where smoking used to be allowed in the 70s, they had to address that to meet secondary smoke needs. That's also going to have to be addressed in the cannabis realm. some of those are pretty detailed state law questions and certainly regulation questions. So the next license type we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk through these pretty quickly because we want to talk about them as a group, and then we still want to get to personal cultivation. We've had active discussion that I love. We've had great comments that I don't want to squelch. On the other hand, I want to make sure we get through all of this. And we do have cookies, so if anybody's getting hangry, we want to make sure that you've got the trail mix. We've got some cuties back there. Stay hydrated. All right, so this license type is manufacturing. So a cannabis manufacturer prepares the cannabis. Remember, in the product movement, we have it coming from the cultivation, which has the nursery and the different types of cultivation. It's then going to have some level of processing there on site, which doesn't really get addressed in state law, but we know exists. Then once it gets to the manufacturer, that manufacturer is going to dry, clean, cure, and package the product. Some of that is also going to happen at the cultivator site. And then this is the part that's really key. This manufacturer is who's going to extract the active ingredient out of that cannabis, whether that's the CBDs or the THCs or the various different types of things, in order to create cannabis-related products, including edibles and concentrates. A very important step in the process, both for adult use and for medical. Interesting about manufacturing is the state has looked at it sort of on two levels. Level one is non-volatile solvents or no solvents, so getting those pieces out of the plant or those substances out of the plant, not using volatile solvents. And then level two, a more industrial processing of that plant product. These are the examples of extraction methods, and we share this not necessarily, we have quality control versus danger. We don't raise this because we think manufacturing licensees create a danger, but we raise it so you have a sense of what we're talking about. It is an industrial process. I had been using the example of a Frito-Lay facility, and Zach at one of the workshops said a better analogy, and so I've taken to using this one, is something like almond milk, where an ag product is coming in, something that's cultivated, and as it's transported, we have to be aware of it being destroyed and all of those things, and keeping it fresh, processing that, pulling from it from the aspects that we want to utilize in other substances, and ending with a product, the milk, the actual packaged milk, but also getting aspects of that almond oil and maybe selling that separately. So that's what a manufacturer does. Because, like I said, it's an industrial process, it's an industrial business, the most appropriate areas are in the industrial zone, and here are the industrial zones in District 2. So again, we always consider community considerations. I think they're less of an issue in manufacturing, and certainly manufacturing in the industrial zones, but we consider odor, security, water use, and energy use. Again, it's an industrial use, building code and safety issues, which will apply, of course, costs, available locations, buffer zones, which again have a little bit of a less of an impact, but we keep them in. Fees, that's that really difficult question between benefiting and paying for secondary costs, but not hindering a business so much that it can't be viable. And then, of course, enforcement. Any questions on manufacturing? Again, we saw how that product movement utilizes manufacturing, and now we understand that's where we're extracting those substances from the ag product. Any questions? All right. You guys are ready to discuss it, I can tell. Oh, go ahead. Let's get you a mic. Let's just make sure you get a mic.
I see you're speaking to edibles and oil.
The creation of them at the
Right.
manufacturing stage, correct.
Are we going to make hash?
Certainly that's a concentrate. Yeah, and in fact, that's utilized in both the medical market and the recreational market.
So that's approved under this law.
That is a concentrate, I believe. So that, it's not listed here, but yeah, so it is an ingredient, and it's also a concentrate, and that is a form by which both medical and adult users end users may utilize that product.
What are other concentrates?
So, and certainly the industry professionals can help us, but utilizing, pulling out oils, they might use it in muscle rubs or various different products that are either used on the body or ingested. And so those are addressed in state law, and they have packaging requirements as well as ingredient list requirements. And so once it gets from the manufacturer to the distributor, and again, that's part of the track and trace, it would then ultimately go to a dispensary retail for the end user, which could be a medical patient or an adult over 21. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to testing. Testing, I think, is a really interesting business model that we're considering whether we want to have in our community, whether we think it adds to our community or we think it's part of a cannabis market we see a value to here in District 2 and in the unincorporated county. Testing is a business type, a license type, that will test all the cannabis and certify it for resale or transfer prior to delivery to dispensaries. The state has said we have set standard as a state to say your pesticide residue levels have to be below a certain amount, very similar to agricultural testing. And in fact, the models of a testing business look a lot like and probably will be the same as existing ag testing. So when they test the skin of an apple, there is a minimum level of residue that can exist. This is a very similar model. The levels are different for the medical product right now than they are from the adult use product, and that's really interesting from a regulatory standpoint on our end, but certainly the licensee will be obligated if they are selling a medical product or selling an adult product to meet those state testing requirements. And this testing lab will be a state certified lab. Obviously not a federally certified lab, but it'll be a state certified lab. And they will be testing for cannabinoids, contaminants, microbiological impurities, and other compounds spelled out in state law. So certainly pesticides, fungus, other issues that have happened in the black market, the state was attempting by creating this license type to have a more uniform product where people really do understand and know what they're getting. I am not advocating one way or another, but that was the state's goal in creating this type of standard. So I just want to make sure you understand that as we talk about whether this is a business type we want. Any questions on the testing license type? David?
Personally, I believe that testing would be the most important thing that the county could partake. Licensing and locations for dispensaries and all that is minor compared to testing, because there are some really, really nasty pesticides that get put into even the most, the grower with the most integrity will use nasty stuff. And
he's going to put this in the form of a question.
And then regardless of what there's also molds. And the dispensaries don't necessarily test, even though they do. So the question is, my question, I guess, is, please, can you please put higher emphasis on this for the public good rather than, just look at,
So can I put a higher emphasis on this? Well, I can certainly convey to the board that this is a really important part of that product movement, because what I'm hearing you say is we need to ensure that that end user has a product that is free from pesticides, is free from fungus, is free from mites. And so if we are going to allow cannabis businesses where we expect our citizens to be end users of cannabis product, you think this is very important. Do you see this as valuable here in San Joaquin County?
Oh, yeah, most definitely for San Joaquin County, too, because if you want to allow our growers
form of a question.
If you want to allow our growers to distinguish themselves like Sonoma and Napa has for their wine and their grapes, San Joaquin County could be known as producing very clean, high quality, safe cannabis if you follow through with good testing.
So did you hear me, Zoe? Yes, I heard you, David. Good job putting it in the form of a question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're going to open it up, you guys, on all the types, so don't worry. You'll get a chance to. Any other questions on testing? Okay. And I don't mean to race through, but we want to have a meaningful discussion on personal cultivation too, and we want to have a meaningful discussion on these license types. And everybody gets hungry and cranky when we get too late. All right, distribution. Okay, so we actually had somebody raise earlier that we have a lot of distribution here in San Joaquin County. And this is very similar to the existing warehouses and logistical spaces that we have. Distribution business will regulate the flow of cannabis between different cannabis business types. In that product movement slide, you saw that distribution right there in the center. Product comes in the testing or in the track and trace. They're going to have to verify that this is the same weight, same package, all of those things. That's part of their job. They will then send, so the manufacturer will send it to the distributor will send it to the test. It'll come back to the distributor, it'll go to the end user in that way. So they'll store it. Maybe not in a facility quite this big, but you'll get that idea. It's part of the logistical flow, and they will have and do have obligations under state law to maintain amounts and confirm testing levels and all of those things. All right, any questions on distribution? Okay, let's get a mic here because the mic is close to them. Bob, if you can get that gentleman a mic
Is,
also.
is that going to be distribution of everything? The edibles, the topicals, the flowers, the everything?
Yes, my understanding is yes, and that's because under state law as it exists now, and remember, it is changing. I do not see in product movement and in the description under state law the product being able to go from a manufacturer directly to a dispensary and retail. Now, that doesn't mean ultimately that won't change as regulations evolve and grow, but right now my understanding is that product then has to go to a distributor, and that's in part because it's also then got to go to a testing facility before the end user. And so in that kind of complicated product movement, it's got to reach the necessary licensees and be confirmed in the track and trace system as well as in the testing system. So that's how we understand it to work at this point. Next question.
Are we talking about a bonded warehouse?
I believe that would probably be the case, if not by regulation, certainly by that business having an interest in meeting the needs. Remember, it would be a vendor or it would be a customer or a vendor with the manufacturing facility, the testing facility. It's part of a product movement. So similar to the Amazon warehouse, certainly people at each stage have to protect their products. So we would expect both on the business side, those things to be addressed, as well as on our regulation side, we may be looking at that and what's appropriate and what's enough. It's a whole new land, so we're not 100% sure.
Is alcohol treated the same way?
Alcohol is moved similar in the sense that the Tidewater laws and sort of the laws that restrict vertical integration of alcohol movement through the product process, meaning a wholesale retailer distributor cannot locate or be the same. And that's, again, those post-prohibition laws made it so that no one entity, Coors, could not control the entire vertical market of that product. So we see this medical scheme and the adult scheme actually did mirror those Tidewater laws, do mirror that post-prohibition alcohol structure. And in fact, that's where it came from. Lori Ajax, the director of the Bureau, was a long time participant, bureaucrat, brass in the alcohol regulation at the state level. So it really came from the ABC structure. It came from that structure. It's very similar to that structure. And the limitations of that structure apply here. The difficulties of that structure apply here. Those moments when can a winery sell its wine at a Save Mart event. There was a case that came through. You're aware of that? I think it was the Grape Bowl or the Grape Fest, that there was a winery that wanted to sell its wine or participate, but in fact it was a fundraising event sponsored by Save Mart. That was a violation of the Tidewater law, the Tidewater Act. And so we're going to have those same questions here. We're going to have those crossover questions, and they are not easily answered. But it is similar to alcohol. So I hope that answered that question. Next, you have a question on?
Well, I got a few questions. I've been pretty quiet
He
back
has been
here.
really quiet. I noticed that.
My
Somebody
name's
comes to
Pete.
life leader.
You talked about alcohol. I just retired for 41 years in the alcohol in the distribution side of it.
Congratulations.
Well, but now I'm obviously, getting into this side right here.
I keep trying to retire, and they call it quitting.
Well,
So.
that's it. But a couple of them that I want to say. Your testing labs, it reminds me so much of craft beers. Testing labs are probably the most important thing you can do in this industry, because if you put bad product out there, it's going to hurt this industry, and all it takes is a few of them. So,
and certainly going to hurt that user.
Well, the user will find it out in a hurry, but you know what? You don't need that. My thing is in the alcohol, and Lori Ajax I've worked with for a lot of years when she was in alcohol. The system is set up, when you asked about, is it going to be very similar to beer or wine or liquor? A lot of there's going to be similarities. There's going to be, I would say, some growers that are going to want to be with distributors. There's going to be some growers, I call them the nanos or the micros, that are going to, there's a smaller grower and they want to just do some little local stuff, and they may be working with, just their local outlets or whatever. But I think the system is
But they
working.
will have to go through those license types, and that's, the state hasn't
absolutely.
exempted by size.
Yeah, as I've been trying to work close with the state, my thing is, my question to this group, we talked about, okay, distribution. We've talked about, the cultivators. We've talked about the dispensaries, and everything I keep hearing, it's up to the counties to decide on how many licenses they're going to give to each of these categories.
Well, that's one model. That's just one model.
It is a model.
It's a big discussion point, though. You're right. That's a lot of
it's a big
jurisdictions are doing that.
discussion because I think we heard earlier about taxes and about, permits. And so it's up to the model of each county to do because, we're working through licensing, or preparing stuff for that. But my question to you was, we looked through all that. San Joaquin has not come up with a model as of yet, because I don't believe the state is going to decide on how many licenses
They're not. And in
They're
fact,
not.
that's why we're here. So we're hoping that you say, you know what? I like that model of numbers, and here's how I think you should give them out. Or I don't like the idea of having a limited number of distribution licenses that you give out, and instead I think you should allow them in a certain area and let the businesses, whoever comes, as long as they meet the requirements. Or alternatively, I don't think you should allow distributors at all. So we want that feedback from you both tonight by comments into the mic, by contributions to the website, by letters, by emails. That's what we want.
All right, well, and that's it, because I do think you need to look at the growers or the dispensaries or even distributors. Look at their business model. What is it going to look like, and then make some decisions there too.
Interesting. So that's a deep role for the county to actually look at a business model. That's an interesting notion. In your work and I want to get back to questions on distribution and then ultimately open up that discussion, but in your work in the alcohol industry, did you ever look at the business plan of a liquor store or a wholesaler?
Well, for the liquor, we always looked at them because they're carrying so many different items. So as a distributor, you needed to look at, if you had new items, where might that fit in that liquor store? They've only got so much shelf space. So
Got it.
You're working on that. But
Interesting. So kind of a different nuanced set of questions, but important to that the entity is aware of what we're looking at. And that would be at the state level you worked.
with the state level, and as a distributor, we were always for the state on excise taxes and stuff. It came back to distributors,
Right.
or recycling distributors.
Okay.
A lot of bills.
Any other questions on the cannabis distribution license type? You promise it's a question? Pinky swear. Okay, go ahead.
So one problem with Trinity County was that there was a lot of national forests there, and state highways would cut through them, and people driving on a state highway in a national forest would get arrested by the forestry, and it was a federal offense. So that in distribution coming in the future here, with this county saying, being very pro, and let's say the next county over is not, if somebody wants to distribute through a county on a interstate or a state highway, or are people going to have to drive around different counties?
In fact, the state law has said locals. There was a big debate, obviously, in the development of this law, as in the development of a lot of laws, the question of how much local control remains at the county and how much control lives at the state. And the state law says counties, you cannot say cannabis business license holders from other jurisdictions cannot transport through your jurisdiction. So we as a county cannot say you cannot transport through our jurisdiction. As far as the roads, the state has said nothing about what roads they could drive on. Clearly, there's always the elephant in the room of the feds, but we don't have federal highways, so it's different than national federal lands. So we don't have that here in San Joaquin County.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions on the distribution license type? Go ahead. Bob's going to sprint over there. We're going to watch him. No pressure, Bob. Everybody watch Bob.
Do you guys have a computer program preferred for the track and trace system? I know LA's working on a company that they might license for their area. Are you working with a computer program that is already here, or
I will tell
anybody?
you that I have emailed quite a few different companies, and if you have a company that you know of or that you would like us to have discussions with, we would love that. That is very detailed down into the regulations and sort of down into if yes, then what, then where, then who, then how, and then it's like, oh yeah, and. So the other thing is that we really want to see the state regs specifically on that, because any vendor discussion would clearly, they would have to meet state regs. We've had a few reach out to us, but that is, that's a few steps ahead. I was busy choking when Mark was like, we're going back in August. I mean, these timelines are tight, and so we're doing the public outreach now. We'll ultimately compile these into a report, and then we'll be looking at those more specific questions. All right. Now, transportation. Again, San Joaquin County has a number of existing transportation businesses. They are an integral part of having a successful agricultural economy. And so we have trucking companies for our logistic businesses, for our ag businesses. Because we exist in the center of the state, we are certainly a hub for Amazons of the world, things like that. So this one is always really an interesting discussion, I think. Licensed transporters under state law are not your just run-of-the-mill ag truck. In fact, they'll be transporting cannabis between cannabis license types and ultimately to the dispensary where the end user will get it. But there are some very specific rules from the state, which those set the minimum for us, and we could also enhance them. They need to utilize non-marked vehicles. I believe Greg mentioned they would be like a Brinks truck. There is not at this point requirement for that level of security, but certainly I can imagine a licensee may want to utilize that level of armor. Also, they must transport an electric shipping manifest and carry a copy. So that's a little bit of a higher standard as far as tracking and tracing. So they have to track every ounce, gram, milligram, I'm sort of learning the metric system here, in the back of their truck, because the track and trace does apply even to this license type. And again, those are going to be unmarked trucks. Not that somebody couldn't certainly see them coming to and from a business, but I think it's very similar to jewelry transport or a cash transport. I'm not advocating for the business type, but I definitely want to put out there the state has considered security as an issue, and we certainly would too. Any questions on the transport license type and sort of questions about how we might address that at the county level? All right. Now, here is the discussion, and this workshop is running much later than our other workshops because we've had a lot of really good input. So I apologize. It's late and it's long and people are hungry and it's warm in here, but I think this is an important set of license types to discuss. And then we do after that have the personal cultivation and the question of reasonable regulation on that. So should the county, again, threshold question, permit any of these types of businesses in the unincorporated county? Is this something you see as a value, or no, we don't want these license types? Again, manufacture, testing, distribution, and transportation of cannabis. Then the secondary question, when you say yes or no, we should or shouldn't allow these, the question is, should we treat them differently if they are a medical or an adult, or should those be, if I transport, and I've either got the right manifest, I've got the right cameras, I've got whatever. So let's open up that discussion for the threshold question of whether we should allow these, and then if we should, do we see a medical and adult use? So Rosa's got Mondo there, and then we'll go ahead and take Zach after that.
I believe it all should be permitted. It's nothing but economic growth for Stockton, and I don't see why we should leave any of it out of it. When if you do leave one of those categories out, especially like something big like transportation or distribution, you're leaving that up to another form, i.e. black market. And why not know what's going on in your city rather than let something slide?
So you want to see that whole product movement permitted and within San Joaquin County, so nobody's utilizing, either going out of the county or utilizing a non-county transporter or distributor.
Roger.
Okay.
And then on top of that, businesses, it should be, if you have all your permit in order, or all your paperwork, it should be treated the same as medical or recreational.
Okay, so you don't necessarily see a need for, in these logistic business types, treating medical and adult differently or incentivizing one over the other?
Right.
Okay. Any other comment? Oh, Zach, that's right.
Try and make it quick.
I like that. I like that plan.
Four quick points. Number one is that in all of these businesses, there's going to be no public access allowed to these facilities. And so some of the public safety concerns that may exist for dispensaries, for instance, can be easily and adequately addressed by reasonable security requirements for these businesses that do not provide public access.
Okay, so it's different in that respect. Okay.
Second point is that to facilitate the commerce that is going to be existing between other prospective licensees, commercial cultivators, and dispensaries, for instance, these business types are what serve to facilitate that commerce between licensees themselves. Given, coupling that with the fact that transportation through a local jurisdiction from one commercially regulated jurisdiction to another cannot be restricted by the subject jurisdiction, it does not make any sense to restrict this type of commercial activity.
So we could have a Sacramento County transporter coming into San Joaquin County, and we wouldn't be able to look at them and say, we want extra cameras, or, we want access to whether you're complying with state law. We wouldn't have that. That's your point.
Correct.
There. Okay.
And then looking at our existing transportation infrastructure and our location within the state with respect to other more heavily impacted industry areas like the Emerald Triangle area, the North Coast, Calaveras County to our east, the Bay Area to our west, and especially as it relates to those regions and us being in the middle of them, and the Los Angeles area, which has about 400 to 500 permitted dispensary operations. Allowing these businesses to operate in San Joaquin County in this region could drive enormous and profound economic growth.
Okay.
So that's it.
So it sort of plays to our strengths, and getting revenue from that could potentially really benefit the county. Is your thought? Okay.
Funny thing, I'm actually supporting Zach. If the county's going to get engaged,
Zach, you should be a little nervous about that. Go ahead, sir.
If the county's going to get involved in this, our roads work, and we have the warehouses, and we have the university. We have lots of sources of contributors to these various functions, and oh, by the way, our roads work.
Our roads work. Okay.
Which is not something that can be said for other counties. Take a look at Sacramento or Alameda or San Francisco.
So we could utilize our existing infrastructure. In fact, do we think some of this revenue could actually go to help our existing infrastructure, maybe go into our general fund for maintenance or something like that? So our roads work and they could be even better.
Well, and it could support other government activity as well.
Okay, interesting. I think you guys might have convinced this guy of something. Thank you for your comment. Go ahead.
I think medical and adult use should be in the same.
Okay.
Because of how much it's going to cost you to regulate these things. If you have one team doing the whole job as opposed to two teams doing separate jobs, just like in distribution, if you have a salesman that's doing all of his
Oh, you mean teams within the business, not teams within the county?
No, the county.
Oh, so like
you have
our
to hire
code
somebody
enforcement
to
equivalent.
regulate these laws.
I see what you're saying. Okay,
so
go ahead.
if you have one team as opposed to two teams, it would make much more sense on dollars you have to spend as a county.
Couldn't we utilize one team? I mean, we have
Yes.
code enforcement officers that look at weed abatement, not this kind of weed abatement, and who look at junk and trash or look at, various, so they do different things, but do you think that there's not a value in them differentiating?
I think it's going to cost you a little more money to have two separate teams.
Okay, because you have to look at that product and actually test it or kind of follow, because you can't just visually tell.
And if you have two separate locations, that person has to go to both locations.
Correct. Okay. I see what you're saying. So streamline makes sense to you both on the
Yes.
regulation side and on the business side.
And the government side, yes.
Okay. That's more efficient. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
And just one final thing. With regard to quality, why should ordinary users get any lower quality than medical users?
My understanding is what the state has laid out is not a quality differential, but a testing standard differential. And so I don't know that they equate that with quality, but you may. I don't know.
Well, that means you can use certain pesticides on my dope, but you can't use those on his.
Well, it's not in the pesticide regulations, but yeah, you have a point. There's a difference, and certainly that has to be rectified at the state level. Thank you, gentlemen. Any other comments on the logistic license types as far as whether we should or shouldn't allow them? Okay, so we are now wrapped up on the business side, and what we're going to do now is move to personal cannabis cultivation. Mark's going to take this one over, and again, I know it's late, but I think those comments were really worth spending time on, and I appreciate the input. So now we want to hear about personal cannabis cultivation, and this is, your house and your next door, so it's an important topic.
I have it. Thank you. All right, so we've talked about, Zoe led you through a discussion of all of the commercial types and the issues there, and so we want to bring this back around and close it out then with a discussion of, so how does it affect you at home? How does it affect your neighbor? Because the disputes that people get called about, the disputes that we hear about in our offices, the disputes that they hear about at the code enforcement are, well, my neighbor is doing this, and it's somehow affecting my use of my property. We said earlier that the county can regulate those activities to try and minimize those impacts. And so my question for you is this. Let's see. So state law says you can cultivate up to 6 plants inside a private residence or inside an accessory structure to a private residence that's fully enclosed and secure. Under state law, private residence means a house, an apartment unit, and I heard the comments earlier about the apartment unit, and I think that's appropriate, a mobile home or other similar dwelling. They cannot be visible from a public place. The county cannot ban personal cultivation that fits within that framework, but may restrict the size of the total square footage for the grow, the location within the home, the use of electricity, required mitigation of odors and mold, building code violations, all of those types of health and safety activities. The same type of impacts that you've been talking about for the past 2 hours, building code, indoor cultivation locations, is the bathroom, is the hallway, express landlord approval if you're not the owner of the property. Distance from schools, permits and fees, limits on plant height, etc. Should there be a registration process or what do you call it, a parcel? A patch tax. Any questions about the rules that currently exist from the state about personal cultivation? Yes, sir.
There you go.
I don't get it. You can't even grow a lousy plant in your backyard?
The way that the statute is written says that by right you can grow 6 plants in your house or in an accessory structure. Now the county can say, oh, we think growing it outdoors is a great idea. You can grow it in your backyard, you don't have to have it inside. But by right, the county cannot restrict the cultivation in your house or less than 6 plants. 6 plants or less.
That's ludicrous.
Well, you'd have to talk to the guys who wrote it.
That's why they're here, because you got to see that the craziness in that, like I went over earlier. Indoor is so much more trouble, dangerous, everything. Outdoors is the way to go. I mean,
I hear you. I hear you, and that's exactly what we want to hear. We want to gather that information to take back to the Board of Supervisors. They didn't write the state law. There were a certain interest group that were responsible for putting it all together. They put it together, and that's what they came up with. Now, whether that was a compromise, because, making sausage, it gets ugly. Making laws, it's the same thing. You compromise in that process. So I don't know how they came to that decision that said, okay, indoors, outdoors.
Steve Moore and his boys, they had a year-long thing, and he recommended that to the County Board of Supervisors, and they went with it.
Well, but we're not talking about this Board of Supervisors. This is
a ban in San Joaquin County right now. Today.
Yes, I agree with you. That you're absolutely right. But what we're talking about is this ban that says you can grow indoors, or that you can grow indoors. That's state law. Steve Moore had nothing to do with that. That was the folks who wrote that. I have no idea who they were. Pretty sure it was not Steve Moore, though, because they came up with the whole... Right. They said, so in state law, you can grow 6 plants indoors.
There's nothing in the state law about outdoors.
There's nothing in the state law about outdoors. So for personal cultivation, for your personal use, my personal use, anybody's personal use, over 21, I can grow 6 plants. I can grow them indoors. A city or a county may allow you to grow outdoors, but they're not required to. But they cannot prohibit you from growing your 6 plants indoors. But what I want to hear about is, what are your concerns for growing indoors? And I've heard yours: the mold, the electricity, the building code, the landlords. I jotted them down as you were saying them, so I've got those. But and if you are a person who partakes, God bless you. And it's not a concern for you. What about for your neighbor, though? What about your neighbor who doesn't partake?
They should have voted.
Well, maybe they did.
Because the voters have spoken. That's why I look at it.
Okay, so, but your neighbor can still object to you using your property in such a way that it's a nuisance. It creates a nuisance for them. So what I want to hear from you is, how can you use your property? If the county has a role in this, what should the county say to reasonably regulate so you can grow your 6 plants, but it doesn't negatively impact your neighbors?
Well, there's no way to get rid of the smell. There's outdoors, you got to deal with it. Now, I live out in the county. There's a turkey barn across from me, about 600 yards. And when that southern wind comes in the summer, okay, I've had to leave my house. It actually gave me a headache. It was so strong. And I don't see anybody giving him a ticket or anything. That's why you live out in the county. Because people have cattle. This guy got 50 cows behind me. I got flies that smell. I don't go over there and complain to him. Your cow dung smells or whatever. I don't tell the turkey guy barn, hey, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to call the sheriff on you. I'm in the county.
Okay.
You deal with that. That's their smells in the county, and that's why we moved into the county. So we could have a garden, so you could have a horse.
Okay. Armando?
I mean, another way is just neighborhood consideration, asking your neighbors. A lot of people have homeowners associations. Everybody has to get approval from their homeowners. Why can't there be a pot association with that neighborhood? Work in various ways. It can also help with security in the neighborhood. It'll bring in security, actually, because people actually be watching out for their neighbors like people used to do. People used to care about their neighborhoods. This is another way that I see it actually can bring neighbors together and actually protecting each other's personal property as well.
So finding ways to encourage neighborhood cooperation and neighbor-to-neighbor communications.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
Another thing too, by being more friendly to the people, you're going to make people cooperate with law enforcement.
Right.
You gonna regulate the smell of my lemon tree?
Am I going to regulate the smell of your lemon tree?
It's the same damn thing. My hydrangeas, are they offensive because of the color? This is a right to farm county.
We're not talking about farming, though.
We are talking
no,
about
we're not.
farming.
We're talking about
legitimate state-approved
We're
crop
talking about
for
personal cultivation. Use. And farming is a commercial operation.
Well, my neighbors don't get pissed off about my tomatoes. Why should they get pissed off about my pot?
I don't know why they should. But my question is, the county is going to hear this, and the county is already hearing this, right? Throughout these meetings, we've heard concerns about, how is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact my house? How is this going to impact my house, my home values? Whether those are legitimate concerns or not. They are concerns that people have, and that's information that's going to get presented to the board, either through this forum or through people contacting the board members. So, what do you want me to respond to the board? You shouldn't be offended by my hydrangeas? That's not going to carry the day. The board wants to know if I have Bob here and Sally here, and Bob is bothered by the smell. Who knows? Maybe he's got a very sensitive nose. Maybe it gives him migraines. How do we address that? Let me hear from him, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Zach.
Respectfully, to my fellow attendees, I believe these forums are geared towards, county staff accepting constructive input as to how they can address through regulations some of the potential negative impact that may exist, for neighboring properties, and taking that constructive input potentially as from you as members of the community as arguments in favor of why you should allow, or the county should allow, personal cultivation outdoors. Way that you can address community concerns in support of your position, rather than throwing out rhetorical arguments as to why one thing or another is ludicrous. As far as my comment is concerned, I agree with Armando. Promoting some sort of neighborly communication, perhaps consent, or consent from adjacent landowners, requiring some reasonable setbacks for personal cultivation, restricting that to the interior of your property, restricting it to a reasonable proportion of your property, for instance. Those are all potential ways for the county to address through regulation the potential negative impact on neighbors.
Okay, so setbacks from the property line, locations within your property if you're going to do if the board wants to go with the outdoors growth. Let me go over here, and then I'll come back to you.
So just, I think probably an easy way to solve that problem where you're wanting to grow outside, but the state law says, your county is going to tell you whether you can or can't grow outside. I think an accessory structure means that you could have an attached greenhouse, maybe not with clear plastic, but with shade cloth and some sort of door that opens and closes, and that's an accessory structure. That's not quote-unquote outdoors. So there you go. Today, here, now. I think you could do that, but I'm not a lawyer. So what I'm curious about is I've just thought it as catch-22. I don't know if there's a name for it. If somebody is renting land and wants permission to grow from the owner, which he's required to get if he's growing medical marijuana medicinally currently, but that owner, if having knowledge that marijuana is being grown on his property, he is at risk of having the land seized by the federal government. There's this this limbo. Do I ask the owner of the land if I can do it, or do I do it without his consent? The owner, will there be any sort of protection or clarification in situations where somebody wants to grow on land that's not their own?
That's a really good question. One of the issues that we're facing is that while all of this is developing in California, how we're going to roll out adult use and how that's going to interact with medicinal use. You have the folks in Washington, D.C. going, yeah, medicine may be okay, we're not so hot about the adult use. And so, as this industry develops, we have no idea what tomorrow or Friday the federal government may decide to do. And so really those who are looking at the commercial aspect are really have to take that into consideration about the assets that they may be putting at risk by getting into that industry.
Would you consider not having to get a landlord's consent? So if somebody was renting land and they got their landlord's consent, and it makes them possibly, just in the most unlikely of scenarios, having their land seized by the government, which doesn't happen very much anymore, but could it be that in this county that you wouldn't require a leaseor or a renter get permission from the landowner? That way both parties are protected?
It could be, but that's a decision that's made by the board. And that's why, we're gathering this information, these comments from you, to take back to the Board of Supervisors so that they can take that into consideration as they make their determination about how to roll out this entire process.
if they can regulate the odor of a marijuana plant, can't they regulate the odor of any damn plant? I mean, certainly I must grow something in the backyard that's offending somebody in the neighborhood.
That may be, but that's not the topic for this evening. The topic for this evening is and right now
No,
is
but
this
by-
personal cultivation of cannabis.
By extension, that is the issue. It's the number one thing on your list. Is
Yes,
odor.
Odor is absolutely a concern because that impacts your neighbors. So here's a good example. Earlier, folks were talking about comparing this with tasting rooms and wineries. So there are a lot of wineries in the Lodi area that have weddings during the weekends during summer, and you have neighbors who they're right there on the property line, and they have to listen to Proud Mary 52 times a week, as it's from their outdoor music. Odor is a lot like that music because it doesn't respect property lines. It's going to cross over. Has the board tried to address the outdoor amplified music from the wineries? Yes, they have. To try and respect, okay, business owner, we're going to respect that you want to have a winery, and we're going to respect that you want to have weddings, and you're going to make a business out of that. But Mr. Winery or Miss Winery owner, we're going to expect you to also conduct your business in a way so that you minimize the impacts on your neighbors. And I think that that's the question that the board's going to be asking here is there a way to reasonably regulate this to minimize, to respect both your ability to grow for yourself and minimize that impact on your neighbor who doesn't want to partake? It's a difficult question. You're hitting all the hot buttons. And I don't have the answers, but that's what we're looking to you as the public to provide.
Well, my final comment. I watched this thing evolve. It only took us 45 years to get here. And now that we believe that we have a right to grow something in the backyard, we don't.
That's an issue you have to take up with the state legislators.
Well, hopefully that'll change. But the only two concerns I see with outdoor grow is your prowling and your smell.
Okay.
That's your only two you got to worry about. Prowlers and smell. That's the only thing they never complain about.
Right, so some element of security. And I think you talked about that earlier at the very beginning of the meeting. You talked about the fence and...
Some of the people as part of the licensing thing.
Right.
Non-lethal type things you can do to repel intruders without actually shooting somebody.
Right.
Because what's going to happen, there's going to be some guy, he's going to grow, and here's this kid coming down, 16 years old from a party he had down the street. He's got a buzz, and he's going to say, well, you know what, I just bumped into this big coleus that was hitting me right in the head, and it smelled so good I just started stealing it, and this guy shot me. Well, that's why you put the fence up and the Constantine wire, so the kid can't say that. The judge will say, no, son, you climbed that fence, you cut the wire, you weren't drunk, you were stealing. That's worth $20,000, $30,000. You got to up the penalties for prowling for medical marijuana, too, because that's like grand theft. That's a felony. Some of this medicine can be worth $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to that person, 6 months of death. And you're saying it's like stealing a lawnmower or bicycle. The laws have to be up for prowling. That's another thing you got to look into.
Okay. All right.
Just one more impact I would see add to that would be impacts to children. Attractive nuisance if it was grown out in the backyard. We're neighbors. We've had calls before. Code enforcement has had to deal with other types of, where kids, there's a bunch of junk piled up and kids are like, oh, that would be fun to play in. So that's just potentially could be another thing to consider in addition to the two you stated. Just children being inquisitive or knowing what that is and getting into it.
Absolutely. All right. Any other comments? Because we want to wrap this up. So, Mondo? Okay. And last question or last comment here.
Quick one. A buddy of mine from North Carolina says everybody grows tobacco in their backyard. They've been growing tobacco for hundreds of years there, and now people supplement their income with a little bit of tobacco. It's in their culture. And with people allowing to grow 6 plants in their backyards, will the county allow them to sell it on the market? Because 6 plants if grown well, 4 pounds a plant is 24 pounds. It could be $20,000, $30,000 that every person in the city could have. Are you going to?
It's not within state law. You have to have, in order to enter into the commercial marketplace, you have to have a license. You have to be a licensed grower, dispensary operator, etc. The individual growing in a residential area, growing in their home, is never going to meet the necessary requirements under the state regulations. Highly unlikely.
I got one more for you.
All right, last one then.
Let me pose a question here for you. Let's say you got your guy's 6 plants, and he grows his 6 plants, and he only uses 3 of them through the year. He's got 6 pounds. Let's say he grows 6 pounds, a pound a plant. He smokes 3 pounds, and he has 3 pounds left.
This sounds like a high school math quiz.
So he's got 3 pounds of his medical marijuana left.
All right.
And he's not going to use it because he's got enough for the year.
Right.
So now, is he able to vend that to like another medical patient, trade with him? Because I know on certain occasions I've had friends that have given, like say, $100, $200 worth to a plumber to do some things. Now that plumber takes that medical marijuana, he takes it, you get the plumbing. Are they both in violation? They didn't pay taxes? Are they criminals? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, for it to be, if you're talking about whether they can sell it to somebody else, no, they wouldn't be able to sell it because they're not a licensed retail or dispensary. Can they give it away? Yeah, they can give it away. You grow your tomatoes, you grow too many, you give some to your neighbors. So can they give it away? Yes, that's not regulated at this time. I don't have the answer to that.
Trading has tax implications that are separate of the discussion tonight, so that's something that they should each look into as far as the tax implications of trading. They do generally have to declare a value if they're receiving a value. And so again, that's beyond the discussion tonight. It's certainly an interesting question, but we're guided by state law as far as the exchange or sort of beyond what one is using. You'd have to, talk to your tax guy. You got to talk to your tax guy. And it's beyond our discussion tonight. It is an interesting question, and anytime you're looking at a marketplace, certainly those questions are raised.
Right. And all that money would be infused back into the community anyway. So some guy makes he buys his kids tennis shoes. Well, that's really a bad thing.
The bottom line here is, this is the state and the county getting into the dope business for them.
Well, we've certainly heard that comment, and we've heard it tonight, and we've heard it from other people. That the worst idea that the county could make, or worst decision they could make, is try and chase the money on this. So that is a concern as well. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This has been a great, very active meeting. We have surveys. If you filled one out, if you have additional comments you want us to consider, there's a box over here. Please drop it in. If you don't want to fill one out now, you can fill it out online, sjccannabis.org. There's a survey. If you have questions, you can email us, cannabis@sjgov.org. I've got some business cards around here somewhere that has all that information.